Ivan's small hand reached out toward the sunlight streaming into the house, wondering how long he had been waiting for this moment, and finally, his blue eyes drifted upward with a warm feeling against his skin, taking in the unfamiliar sailing and the strange sensation. As Ivan happily daydreamed about beautiful female warriors possessing bodies, teleporting, and reincarnating into another world, thinking whichever one it was, he had succeeded. Back on Earth, where Kim Sunwoo lived, a blinding flash of light had erupted, marking the long-prepared moment for Kim Sunwoo, a citizen of the Republic of Korea. Inside his room, he skillfully operated his computer, recalling every single book, novel, internet forum, and game he had ever read, as the sky. Kim Sunwoo's hands flew rapidly across his mechanical keyboard, filling the small room with a clacking sound as he processed every work he loved. He quickly generated a massive wall of text in the comments section, leaving behind a 5,700-word review. With an intensely serious look on his face under the blue glow of the monitor, working tirelessly day after day, each time delivering a rigorous and meticulous analysis. Every character and plot point was critiqued by him, from the storyline to the world building, and then Kim Sunwoo earnestly evaluated various external elements within the story, including the character relationship charts that appeared in the work, right down to memorizing the exact locations of hidden rewards and relics. And finally, he critiqued the literary style and design of the work. Naturally, most of the responses beneath Kim Sunwoo's critique were far from praise. In fact, the author capped off the wave of fan outrage with a total of 992 comments, ending in collective backlash and getting blocked across various online communities. Right at that moment, a patch of pure white light carried him away from Earth, transferring his consciousness straight into Ivan's blue eyes, but he had finally succeeded. He had finally possessed a body in another world. The place he found himself in consisted of simple houses built from wood and straw. So let's see. Ivan sat up and sleepily pinched his own cheek to confirm his identity, guessing he looked about 4 or 5 years old, wondering if he should check his stats now. After a moment of thought, he thrust his hand forward and shouted the command from memory to double-check. Status board. After waiting a few seconds, Ivan couldn't see a single thing pop up. He self-consciously pulled his hand back, looking bewildered and deep in thought, figuring this meant it wasn't your typical regression genre, but that was fine. A second later, Ivan regained his full confidence, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips as he put his faith in his own supreme memory, recalling that plenty of the works he had reviewed didn't have status boards anyway. And besides, time and the capability to conquer this other world were entirely on his side. Wearing an oversized shirt and eyes overflowing with determination, he stepped out of the crude cabin, wondering if he should start crafting something to make a fortune first. Time passed quickly for Ivan after his arrival. The sound of people and children working together echoed inside the courtyard as Kim Sunwoo came to terms with his new body, which bore the name Ivan Petrovich. He carefully brought a basket of potatoes to his mother while his father wielded a hoe to till the soil, as his parents were tenant farmers, not to mention the country's name, down to the stark reality that they were completely uneducated and didn't even know how to read. Not long after, Ivan tried using a large stone to whip up some soap bubbles only to scare himself silly, thinking it was a grand innovation when his attempt at making soap failed miserably. After all, he ended up getting a painful smack on the bottom, not just getting his backside beaten for playing with water, but realizing the cold hard truth that something called soap already existed in this world. A long time after, Ivan took over the body of a young kid. Newspapers were scattered all over the long road in the humble town he walked through when he went out to the village to buy eggs for his mother, catching his eye. Ivan was quite surprised while reading the town papers, thinking that if they could print newspapers and had a society capable of distributing them all the way to such a remote rural area, then at the very least this wasn't the Middle Ages, so where on earth was? He held a long ink pen and crossed out lines of text he had written on a piece of paper, as most of the candidate stories on his potential reincarnation list were crossed off that day. The time since Ivan's appearance grew longer bit by bit. He once again gathered a little more information about the world after his reincarnation in this new country, finally learning the name of the current country and its king. A sudden tongue of fire immediately swallowed the list Ivan had written down from his super memory, as he tore the remaining pages of his candidate reincarnation list to shreds and tossed them into the fire. A warm, cheerful city only made him realize and grow increasingly suspicious now that he was in a country he had never heard of, serving under a monarch he had never heard of, surrounded by neighboring countries he had never heard of. Ivan sat before the burning pile of paper, the faint glow illuminating his serious expression, realizing that rather than worrying about which work or genre he had reincarnated into, figuring out the nature of this world was his biggest question. But afterwards, the time he spent living here continued to increase. 3 bizarre and ferocious-looking monsters appeared in Ivan's living world, as the Demon King suddenly descended. The reassuring voice of a man echoed through the small village, telling everyone not to worry and to wait for him alongside Ivan. Two cold-looking soldiers in uniform escorted Ivan's father away from the house with a worried expression, as his father, no, Ivan's father, vowed he would definitely return, leaving only him and the orange-haired woman watching the three of them walk away, after being dragged off to the battlefield by the military recruitment officer. Ivan's serious blue eyes then flashed with irritation and frustration, marking the exact moment Kim Sunwoo's ego began to warp. A few more years passed as he successfully lived in this new world. Ivan calmly and meticulously worked alongside his mother spinning and weaving rolls of cloth. No, Kim Sunwoo, or rather, Ivan now tagged along with his mother and handled odd jobs quite skillfully. The time Ivan spent living in the new world flew by once again, bringing him to the 8th year since his reincarnation. He sat upright at a desk, intently holding a pen as he utilized every spare moment to study and finally mastered the language of this other world. Another 2 years of his life in the new world slipped away. On the 10th year since his reincarnation, the sky over his village suddenly turned gray for Ivan, bringing yet another shocking and terrible piece of news. An official notice of his father's death arrived, printed out in neat lines of text on a paper delivered straight to Ivan's hands, with the most ridiculous part being that the dispatch had actually been issued 2 years prior. That grim news left a mix of panic and outrage on his pale face, making him wonder what on earth was going on because he couldn't understand a single thing anymore, leaving him to wonder if the genre of this world was a tactical simulation. Ivan furrowed his brows in bitter frustration as endless thoughts threw him off balance, knowing it was clearly another world, yet it featured gunpowder weapons and steam engines, while on the other hand, knights, mages, demon kings, and demi-humans were all clashing in total warfare, which meant. But the soft noises at that moment made Ivan look up, the confusion still lingering across his face. As he watched the suffering woman trembling all over as she desperately covered her mouth to hold back her cries, thinking, "Mom." Ivan watched her bury her face in her hands and cry, his own voice trembling right along with his emotions as he asked how something like this could possibly happen, doing nothing else except softly trying to comfort the heartbroken woman right in front of him, telling her not to worry, dear mother. The next day, Ivan stood before the train platform, following a column of marching soldiers forward with his mind made up to enlist. Ivan carefully handed his train ticket to the soldier stationed at the front of the carriage, nodding that the pay was 15 copper coins, all of which had been arranged to be sent back under his mother's name. After that, he and the others sat aboard the long-haul train, Ivan hunched over and lost in thought, not out of filial piety, but rather from a deep sense of compassion for the woman sacrificing her whole life for him. His brow pressed down hard, clearly revealing his seriousness and determination driven by the guilt of usurping the body of the real Ivan, the boy who was supposed to be that woman's only pillar of support to keep going. The time he spent in this new body ticked upward once again, marking the 14th year since his reincarnation and the 4th year in the military. Ivan charged into the sea of fire with his distinctive blue eyes, fighting recklessly amidst various weapons as he realized his own body possessed a much greater aptitude for combat than he ever imagined. His boots trampled over piles of demonic corpses fueled by his own frenzy and rage, earning him a series of minor military achievements on the battlefield as he transitioned from a conscript to a regular soldier. The scenery all around him had long since turned blazing and ruined, yet the front line kept getting pushed back pathetically, while half of the allied nations sank into a sea of fire. And around that time, a blonde young man suddenly appeared clad in glittering golden armor. The hero had finally arrived. The main cast Ivan had waited for so long had brilliantly appeared, making him finally think he had figured out the genre of this world. The classic hero defeats the Demon King trope. The sound of bombs exploding high above the deep terrain sent a massive shockwave that terrified all the soldiers. The hero's arrival was supposed to bring hope, but tragically, right on the front line where Ivan fought, enormous sandworms with mouths full of sharp fangs suddenly burst out to charge at them maniacally, and they were still being pushed back pathetically. Ivan's age increased once more throughout his time in the other world. Maximilian had barely appeared before he sliced the Demon King in half with a single swing. And once the hero's party systematically eliminated the demon army's generals, the tide of the war completely reversed. As they bravely brandished the weapons in their hands to keep fighting, Ivan, who had continuously racked up achievements, was reassigned to serve alongside the hero's party. Right as heavy rain poured down from the sky and the forest canopy grew pitch black, the unit tasked with controlling liberated zones and mopping up enemy remnants. To shorten that ridiculously long name, Ivan stood holding 2 axes while looking down at the grotesque monster writhing in the trench, the Extermination Squad, which was a special combat unit thrown into the fray, with rain relentlessly lashing his battered body while the hero's party wiped out the enemy commanders, throwing the opposing camp into complete chaos and collapse. Just like that, 2 years slipped by, his age ticking upward steadily once again as Maximilian's group proudly rode on horseback amidst celebrating citizens to enter the inner city. The hero's party had defeated the Demon King. Ivan didn't show a single expression, merely watching them from high above alongside the other soldiers as he decided to wait for the ending. A second later, his gaze shifted to reveal a cold glare as he stared downward, thinking that now he would finally be able to escape this detestable world. But afterwards, the number of years Ivan lived increased exponentially. The interior of the castle where the Demon King once appeared was now nothing more than an empty shell. And even though the Demon King had been dead for 2 years, there was still no ending in sight. The houses throughout the city suffered varying degrees of damage and ruin from the war, during which time the headcount of the extermination squad dwindled down to a mere fifth. Ivan's blue eyes remained completely unchanged, growing even more hollow in the face of death as he frantically used his formidable combat skills to eradicate the threat of bandits, picking up on his superior's intentions to disband the unit. After completing a final mission that was practically a suicide run, Ivan panted like a starving wolf with blue eyes after a long battle, submitting his discharge papers with the lingering hope that even this drawn-out epilogue would finally come to an end. The years Ivan spent in the other world added up once more, almost entirely against his wishes. At a large church surrounded by lush greenery and a bright sky, where his mother had passed away 10 years prior, Ivan stood outside the gates looking around with a bearded, elderly appearance, completely alone upon returning to his hometown. As he stood quietly gazing at a large statue of an angel, having long since established an orphanage near the capital to take in children orphaned by the war, he still stood there expecting an ending, but nothing happened, remaining just like that right up until the present moment. Right up until now, with the ending credits still nowhere to be found. Outside, the silhouettes of children played happily under the sunlight as their cheerful laughter echoed through the air. St. Vasilisha Orphanage. Ivan sat seriously inside the library hidden behind a thick, bushy beard, continuously and intently scribbling notes into a notebook while muttering to himself, "I miss it so much, I really do." As he used a red ink pen to circle lines of text written inside, missing it to the point of driving him crazy. Sitting there in near despair with his hands clasped together as he questioned it all, wondering how 4 years could have passed since the Demon King died and still have no ending, and whether the condition to beat this game was seriously waiting for the hero to grow old and die. Suddenly, the sound of high combat boots stepping forward echoed through the quiet, which he instantly picked up on from inside the room. Ivan's eyes darted to the side as he shoved his chair backward, his gaze sharpening instantly as he stared straight ahead at the noise, analyzing every single detail the moment he heard the footsteps, the characteristic friction of military gear, the scent of gunpowder, and the packing of the stride, realizing it could only belong to one properly trained soldier. As he already held his custom-made axe in hand, his face etched with absolute seriousness. The door slowly cracked open with its familiar squeak. Dmitri cheerfully raised a hand in salute toward Ivan, greeting him with a long time no see, senior, asking how he was doing and mentioning that he should have come to visit him more often, to which Ivan replied in a deep, gravelly voice, "No, Dmitri." As Ivan raised his axe high as if ready to pounce, asking if he shouldn't have knocked first, causing Dmitri to look terrified and wave his hands in loud protest, complaining, "Senior, when have we ever done things like that? Besides, what's with that beard that doesn't suit you at all?" Hearing that, Ivan immediately softened his posture and issued a direct order, "Get to work." Dmitri chuckled at that, teasing him while handing over a letter, saying, "We haven't seen each other in ages and you won't even let me sit down. Your temper's still as hot as ever," leaving Ivan looking slightly surprised as he stared at the letter, wondering what this was. While stripping off his coat, Dmitri offered some advice as Ivan stood there lost in thought, telling him to just read it first since it was a handwritten letter from Her Royal Highness the Princess. Ivan sighed but cautiously asked Dmitri if there was poison on the letter, to which Dmitri unconcernedly shrugged and sat down on the opposite bench, telling him it was probably just a regular greeting letter and urging him to hurry up and open it. Ivan still looked down with extreme caution, asking what Her Royal Highness the Princess could possibly want. As he recalled the arrogant figure of Elizaveta from his memories, Elizaveta Kirillovna Krasilov, knowing that someone as iron-fisted as Liza would never send him a letter just to check up on his health. Hesitating for a moment before speaking up to ask if the situation was getting pretty tough, prompting Dmitri to look bewildered before venting to Ivan about how brutal it was, explaining that the military administration was whining every single day demanding troop withdrawals. The two of them sat across from each other in the room discussing the situation in Aosin, noting how His Highness Crown Prince Alexander wanted to carve the country up into 5 pieces and sell them all. The surrounding atmosphere grew heavier, while His Majesty the King continued to sit in complete silence without uttering a single word. But then Dmitri smiled brightly and excitedly told Ivan about a sudden plot twist, explaining that the International University, the most prestigious institution in the kingdom's federation, had been founded right in the middle of wartime. Dmitri eagerly continued telling him about the massive school surrounded by riddles, naming St. Jansk University, and asking if he knew who had arrived there this year as fresh students and faculty members. Before answering his own question by bringing up a golden-haired girl who bore a striking resemblance to Maximilian, Isabel, followed by a brave young man wielding a long spear, Oscar, with the third being an elven girl holding a magical staff, Elfiera, the fourth being a fierce red-haired girl wielding a massive axe, Essidice, the fifth being a mysterious, agile girl dual-wielding daggers, Lucia, and finally revealing the gentle face of the hero party's holy maiden, Patricia, nodding that the children of the heroes who defeated the Demon King and the 3 new department heads happened to be none other than the former hero party's holy maiden herself. Dmitri recounted all of this to Ivan with intense seriousness and excitement, explaining that since enrollment had absolutely no age restrictions, promising kids from all over the world were preparing to enter early. But even though his tone was cheerful, his expression carried an ominous, unspoken sinister undertone as he thought about the immense influence tied to the children of the hero party members, asking what would happen if any of them got hurt or lost their lives. Ivan instantly understood the heavy consequences and simply asked what needed to be done since the country was practically finished anyway. Dmitri held up 3 fingers toward Ivan with a serious look, replying that until those kids returned safely to their home countries without a single hair out of place, he needed Ivan to protect them for exactly 3 years. Ivan furrowed his brow, falling into deep serious thought about what kind of messed up hero story ending this was, deciding that the cliché ending of defeating the Demon King and living happily ever after was absolute nonsense when international relations were in chaos, domestic politics were a mess. And on top of that, a profound sense of confusion lingered deep inside Ivan's mind, as he wondered how a girls' academy had suddenly been thrown into the mix. Suddenly jolting upright as if remembering something, Ivan's face panicked, deep worry flashing in his eyes as he blurted out, "Wait a minute." Slamming his fist onto the desk with a burst of fiery momentum, Ivan's hand exerting so much force that the wooden surface cracked and splintered under the pressure, before he immediately reined in his strength, leaving a massive chunk of the table completely smashed out. Realizing at last that this turned out to be a school life genre, Dmitri turned pale at the sight of Ivan's anger, asking with a nervous tremble if Senior was okay, to which Ivan responded with a low, furious tone, asking if he was seriously inquiring whether he was okay. Before Ivan fell silent for a moment, his hands trembling as he muttered that he had been grinding away in this other world for a whole 30 years, only for all of that to turn out to be nothing more than a prologue. Ivan squeezed a piece of wood tightly in his hand and slowly pulled it back, leaving a large gaping hole behind, and concluded that if that was how it was going to be. He looked back at Dmitri with a hint of disdain, asking if he just needed to help those kids graduate, so they could finally go find the ending. Closing his hands into fists as determination and excitement clearly lit up his face, giving a crisp reply to accept the order. "Let's go home, Kim Sunwoo." Kirilovna opened her letter with a greeting to her old comrade, asking Ivan how he was doing and nodding that she still heard news of him from time to time, making it seem like he was living quite well. Reminiscing about the days they spent together and asking if he still remembered the time they struggled to take care of the garden together, saying she had hoped they could all share a cup of tea together just once, yet he walked away without looking back even once. But she grew pensive as she offered a serious warning about the coming days, nodding that winter was coming around again, bringing a cold and quiet season even more chilling than the year before. As she gently reached out to brush against the green leaves, memories of the garden she once shared with Ivan came flooding back, prompting Kirilovna to wander through the corners of the courtyard and yearn for the comrade she trusted the most, calling out to Ivan, the woodsman she trusted above all others, promising to trade everything she had to secure Ivan's help, adding that whatever he desired, she would repay it threefold. And if that compensation still wasn't enough, she would pay him back with their friendship. And if that still fell short to settle the debt, she would pay with their shared memories instead. Kirilovna concluded her letter with a deeply sincere plea, stating that the kingdom still needed his dedication just as it had in the past and would in the future, signing off affectionately as Kirilovna. Sitting in the parlor, Ivan placed the letter down on the table and calmly responded that he had finished reading it, so in short, quickly grasping the request Kirilovna had sent over, to spend 3 years making sure none of the hero descendants got hurt or killed before graduating from the academy. Ivan abruptly realized the true genre of this world, thinking to himself that he never expected the setting to turn out to be a school academy, meaning he just had to endure 3 more years to reach the ending and finally go home. Letting out a heavy sigh as he looked at his friend standing across from him and asked who would be arriving first, prompting Dmitri to immediately report the intelligence he had gathered, stating that it was Einar's daughter, reporting that the great warrior's child was scheduled to set off first. Upon hearing that familiar name, Ivan instantly froze, whispering Einar, momentarily flashing back to his former comrade's current status, reflecting that even though the man was now called the King of Drone, whenever he thought of the person who used to be a member of the past generation's hero party, Ivan pictured him just like this, recalling the memory of Einar swinging a massive axe while loudly shouting instructions like, "Hey kid Ivan, that's how you're supposed to chop wood," as he quietly thought about the very first person heading toward the academy, feeling completely helpless upon realizing that the person he had to protect was none other than Einar's daughter, the child of that absolute lunatic. Back in the kingdom of Drone, the citizens excitedly praised their princess, bursting with pride over the greatest descendant of Drone carrying the blood of the legendary conqueror Einar, convinced she was destined to conquer everything in her path. At the dock, a large crowd had gathered, and a sweet melodic female voice rang out as the girl grew shy from the flattery before shouting loudly, "You guys keep teasing me like this, all right, just you wait and see." While someone in the crowd boastfully bragged, "Of course, whose daughter is she anyway?" And the citizens standing nearby suddenly remembered a rumor spreading across the kingdom. "Have you heard the news?" Prompting those around them to immediately ask out of curiosity, turning the noise chaotic with cries of "What is it? What is it?" Until the person leaned in close and mysteriously revealed, "I heard she's going there to conquer a full symphony orchestra." Stepping off the ship, a girl with reddish-orange hair tightly clutching an instrument case arrived with a resounding shriek, "Is there a problem with a symphony orchestra?" And this person was none other than Esidice, the eldest daughter of the berserker Einar. Snorting coldly, she confidently declared to the people who came to see her off, "Just you all wait and see just how successful I'll be." While the system recorded that name as the eldest daughter Esidice, enrolling in the Department of Musical Instruments at the Conservatory of St. Jansky University. The train carrying her sped across the bridge, amidst the freezing snowy mountains, as the Knights Templar saw Esidice off from the kingdom in an extremely grand ceremony. And 2 days later, a sudden train accident struck as the locomotive barreled forward amidst bright red sparks, derailing from the tracks and tumbling toward an overturn. Shifting scenes, Dmitri looked startled at Ivan's firm assertion, asking, "What? A train terrorist attack out of nowhere? Is this certain?" To which Ivan confirmed his prediction without a moment of hesitation, "That's right." Why? The room grew steadily gloomier as he calmly provided a reason Dmitri couldn't possibly understand. Because this is an academy genre story where Ivan recalled the familiar rules of the hero genre, where the hero along with his companions defeats the Demon King, continuing to list the plot points bound to happen, such as one of the trusted subordinates standing by the hero's side, and ultimately the classic conclusion of hero stories where at the end of the journey, the world regains peace, with Ivan understanding that every story operates under its own set of rules, and all of these things, formulas known as genre conventions, work similarly, as every genre has its own logical norms, and as the letter was consumed by fire, he recalled events from 30 years ago. 30 years ago, Ivan tried to dig through his slumbering memories, as he recalled the contents of the burned file. Within his memory, the location where the event took place surfaced clearly. Igorovich Station, where a terrorist attack would occur on the entrance exam train. Ivan was present at the station, quietly investigating while holding a newspaper, fully certain that the terrorist attack was simply part of the norm. Glancing at his watch, he realized what he was waiting for would appear right here, with the current time being 9 o'clock as the train carrying Princess Esidice was about to pull into the station. Observing the entire station, Ivan deduced where the enemy would strike. If someone is targeting Princess Esidice, it has to be this station right on the border, because they first have to cross the border to pin the blame on the kingdom. And since right behind this station is a military zone, the security will be tight. Quietly standing up to leave, Ivan admitted his plan still had plenty of flaws. "Of course, I don't have proof either, so I didn't request reinforcements." "How amateurish," he muttered, continuing to survey the deserted station, before his gaze quickly locked onto a suspicious vegetable vendor smoking in front of a stall. As Ivan silently observed everyone present, noting that among the people at the station, the man acting like he was checking train schedules had already let 3 trains pass by, and, glancing back at the man pretending to sell vegetables, he immediately spotted the absurdity. Selling vegetables while sneaking sideways glances around is even more ridiculous, And who on earth would buy vegetables at this empty backcountry station? To top it all off, he's smoking right in front of the pile of vegetables. Ivan slowly approached from behind, his cold gaze locking firmly onto the suspicious man sitting on the bench. The man jumped in fright upon realizing someone had closed in on him, his expression instantly turning pale with panic. Ivan drew his gun and pointed it straight at the man's head, swiftly subduing him before he could react. Startled by Ivan's sudden appearance, the station staff member angrily snapped, "Who the?" Ivan subtly shifted his barrel, closed in immediately, and spoke in a cold voice, "Silence." Spotting the unusual situation from afar, an accomplice shouted loudly, "Hold on, what are you doing over there? Stop right now." Ivan calmly observed the opponent's reaction and silently deduced, "How ridiculous. From that angle, the pistol should have been blocked from view, they shouldn't have been able to see it at all. Just to be safe, I'll confirm it one last time." Pointing his gun straight at the opponent, he questioned in a chilling tone, "Where does your loyalty lie?" The man stammered in response to Ivan's unexpected question, his panicked expression immediately betraying his suspicion as he stuttered, "W." Without waiting for the opponent to come up with an excuse, Ivan coldly pulled the trigger and finished him on the spot. The gunshot left the remaining men frozen in shock as the guy collapsed onto the floor, his cold blood serving as a warning. Through the opponent's reaction, Ivan instantly identified the identities of everyone present. These guys aren't reinforcements, nor are they loyal agents of the royal family. If they were properly trained agents, they would have stated their unit immediately instead of questioning back. In the end, they're all cut from the same cloth. Realizing their identity had been exposed, the leader panicked and ordered an attack. "Damn it. Fire, shoot that bastard dead." Ivan nimbly dodged the incoming bullets like a beast, thinking, "They're too amateurish. They don't belong to the royal authorities." The terrorists opened fire in unison, but he vanished into the hail of bullets before they could lock onto their target. Ivan drew his battle axe and swept horizontally with terrifying speed, a single slash knocking away the arms of the closest men. He lunged straight into the enemy formation to begin the slaughter, and finally, spinning amidst the encirclement, Ivan delivered a series of decisive slashes that swiftly wiped out the entire group of enemies. And eventually they coldly stared at the ones trembling before his overwhelming power, thinking, they've never faced anyone truly strong. Looking down at his severed arm, the guy screamed in agony, "My arm." Amidst the chaotic mess of corpses, Ivan stood among the fallen, calmly gripping his battle axe to issue a warning. "If you don't staunch the bleeding, you'll die in 3 minutes. Lowering his gaze to the dying man, he resumed his interrogation. "Where are the others?" Terrified, the man spilled the location of his accomplices to beg for his life. "There are 15 guys by the tracks. You can't do anything alone. I'll help you, please save me." He tried to use information about the leader to persuade Ivan. "The leader is a real monster. If you spare my life, I'll draw his attention for you." Leading Ivan to quickly figure out their role at the station. "Turns out you guys are just a vanguard squad." The man nodded frantically, "Right. If you spare me, I'll cooperate with you. I can be very useful." But ignoring the plea, Ivan asked, "Did you hear who is on that train?" The man immediately recounted the info he had received. "I heard it's a train transporting gold bars. They said it's a commercial cargo train sent to the kingdom." Ivan tightened his grip on the axe and looking at him with hopeful eyes, the man cautiously asked, "You'll spare my life, right?" "I answered everything you asked honestly." Ivan coldly rejected his claim. No, there was a lie mixed in there, leaving the man turning pale with panic as he failed to understand where he messed up. What is going on? To avoid complications, Ivan poured all his strength into the battle axe, swinging down to finish off the last man before he could rise, leaving unsaid the thought that he might have been useful. Shifting scenes, the clock on the station platform ticked past the remaining time, reading 9:53 a.m. Ivan calmly wiped the blood off his hands, estimating his cleanup speed. The time it takes for a member of the extermination squad to clear out corpses and bloodstains, 5 minutes. The station platform was deserted as he continued calculating. Cleaning up will take until 9:58, leaving a 2-minute buffer before the train arrives. Having cleared the scene, Ivan stood coldly among the blowing leaves, looking as calm as if no battle had ever taken place, thinking, how boring. Kirilovna calmly asked about the whereabouts of her former comrade. "What about Ivan?" Her subordinate bowed to report Ivan's recent actions. "He suspects a train terrorist attack, ma'am, and he even pinpointed the time and location quite accurately." Kirilovna suspected Ivan possessed a secret intelligence network, asking, "Does Ivan have eyes and ears everywhere?" Which Dmitri immediately denied, "No, ma'am. There hasn't been any sign of that over the past 4 years." Kirilovna chuckled, prompting Dmitri to speak up cautiously, "My lord." She sighed, gazing into the distance as she ordered Dmitri to monitor Ivan's every move, every step Ivan takes, down to his most trivial actions, Write them down and bring them back to me. Kirilovna wanted to keep track of every development regarding Ivan so she could check on him at any time. Her eyes filled with resentment as she recalled his expression when he left for his final mission 4 years ago. Just like when you set off on your final mission 4 years ago. Even though that action was based purely on guesswork, you always exude such strange confidence. The train carrying Esidisi continued across the snowy mountains, heading straight toward where Ivan was waiting. The group tightly gripped the detonators in their hands to execute the plan, while Kirilovna thought to herself, I'm certain of it. Right after that, Ivan vaulted through the snowstorm, swiftly chasing the moving train ahead, convinced Kirilovna's deduction would come true as well, because that was simply the norm in school life stories. The train terrorist attack was bound to happen. Esidisi sat quietly by the train window, completely unaware of the deadly trap awaiting her ahead. While Ivan knew this attack couldn't alter the destiny of important individuals and wouldn't harm the protagonist or key characters, the terrorists had secretly planted explosives along the tracks, with the train hijacking event happening before enrollment because it served as the tutorial phase. The leader gripped the detonation switch tightly, feeling smug as he thought pressing the button would complete the whole plan. The tutorial phase being the stage for players to get used to the game where a mere push of a button ends everything, and thus, his finger slowly pressed down on the red button, officially initiating the train terrorist attack. A violent explosion instantly swallowed the locomotive, shaking the train amidst a sea of flames, while Ivan casually revealed his true plan. From the very beginning, I never had any intention of stopping this train terrorist attack. Esidisi panicked, clutching her head amidst the fierce explosions, though she remained safe because the tutorial phase was meant for the protagonist to handle, while the leader wore a vicious smile, fully convinced the prey on the train had no way out. All right, time to go loot the train. While Ivan prepared to act thinking, I'll use this opportunity to find the organization behind this terrorist plot. Dash forward at incredible speed, and then eradicate that organization right at the academy. Ivan vanished into the thick snowstorm to avoid a direct confrontation, conducting intelligence operations from behind the scenes. Moving along, he gripped his gun and battle axe tightly, ready to eliminate any threats appearing on the path and wipe them out at the root. Amidst the flames, Ivan coldly pulled the trigger, beginning the hunt for those who targeted Esidisi's train, operating just like the extermination squad. Billowing black smoke rose from the explosion, blanketing the snowy mountains. The train derailed from the tracks, overturning amidst a sea of flames and leaving behind a ruined landscape as the terrorists swarmed the wrecked train and cheered. We're filthy rich now. One of them excitedly calculated how to cash in the loot. All we have to do is scrape off the royal insignia, melt it down, and sell it on the black market. We'll be swimming in money, boss. Prompting the leader to immediately urge his subordinates, all right, hurry up and clean this place up. As he spoke, he suddenly froze, a premonition of danger making his expression instantly tense up. A surprise attack arrived with terrifying speed, throwing the terrorists into chaos. One man was blasted headfirst into the ground while the rest panicked and looked around, failing to figure out who had struck, thinking, what the hell? As fear was a trait belonging only to the weak. A terrorist panicked as he looked toward the source of the noise. Damn it, who's there? While Ivan instantly recognized their low skill level, noting that reaction proved not a single one of them had the ability to sense bullet trajectories. The leader gritted his teeth and glared at Ivan stepping out leisurely, roaring, that bastard. Emerging from the smoke with a gun in each hand, Ivan coldly questioned the person before him. Are you the leader? The leader panicked and ordered all his subordinates to open fire. Shoot. Shoot him down right now. Ivan narrowed his eyes in observation, instantly sensing the murderous intent directed at him. He focused on feeling the murderous intent from the incoming bullets, something known as sensing bullet trajectories. Thanks to that, Ivan easily read the exact firing direction of the opponents, preparing to dodge and counterattack as the terrorists opened fire in sequence. While he calmly dodged the barrage and recalled the thought, guns and bullets are useless against anyone who crosses a certain threshold of strength. Because of the murderous intent carried along with them throughout the battle, Ivan sensed the bullet trajectories crisscrossing around him along with all the attack directions, as bullets and weapons naturally exposed them. He gripped his gun tightly, recalling basic combat knowledge for mana users. If it's a handheld weapon, masking your intent with mana is a basic lesson, but doing that with flying objects like bullets or arrows is very difficult. Ivan spun amidst countless intertwined trajectories, smoothly dodging every incoming bullet. He vaulted straight into the formation, dodging bullets while shooting down the closest man, knowing bullets and weapons would expose them. Before the opponent could close in, Ivan drew his gun and pulled the trigger in the blink of an eye, a single bullet piercing straight through an enemy's head. as he silently probed the opponent's strength to evaluate the enemy. Ivan charged into the terrorist ranks and began a cold purge to eliminate the weak. A terrified terrorist watched him strike down everyone in the blink of an eye, cursing, "This son of a..." The leader attacked while angrily demanding, "Who sent you? Where did this mad dog come from?" But Ivan was faster than his thoughts, dodging a blade and breaking the attack stance in an instant as his cold counterattack left the opponent stunned. A punch to the stomach sent the leader flying backward. Before he could even recover properly, Ivan slammed him straight down into a deep pit. The ground caved in entirely from the horrific impact, leaving both him and those standing outside completely frozen in silence. The leader gritted his teeth and threatened, "I've memorized your face, just you wait, I'll..." But Ivan immediately cut him off with a cold question, "Is your memory for faces really that good?" He drew a prepared gun, flashing a smile that made the leader feel uneasy. Ivan identified the true identity of the person standing before him, thinking, "This guy must be the boss of the tutorial stage. And since he's ultimately meant for the protagonist, I have no intention of killing him." However, keeping the leader alive to force him to spit out all the information, he warned, "Answer me right now. If you can think of anything, I know countless ways to inflict pain without leaving permanent injuries." Shifting scenes before leaving, Eurydice sternly warned her father, who always wanted to secretly follow and protect her. "Absolutely not. You are under no circumstances to follow me, if there is even the slightest chance." She resolutely declared the consequences if she caught Einar secretly trailing her. "That I catch you following me, I will disown you." Watching his daughter's back, Einar was stunned upon hearing her firm warning, thinking, "Eurydice, does that mean?" Before being enlightened as he quickly found a loophole in her words. "It just means as long as we aren't spotted, it'll be fine." Einar secretly summoned the most trustworthy warriors of Drone, "which is why I've gathered all of you here." Looking around, he loudly sought someone capable of secretly protecting his daughter. "Which of you is the warrior who can protect Eurydice without getting caught at all?" A warrior immediately stepped forward and confidently accepted the assignment. "Right here, brother." Appearing unexpectedly behind him, the person made the entire group instantly freeze in realization. Who on earth are these guys? The warriors who used to strike fear into countless people were originally a group of berserkers, but now they were men recognized by their lord as brothers, and Einar had many younger brothers like this. He quickly realized that disguises wouldn't fool his daughter either. "Eurydice already knows all your faces. Even if you disguise yourselves to board the train, she'll recognize you immediately." Therefore, Einar immediately proposed a plan that left all the warriors dumbfounded. "Which of you is the warrior who will chase the train on your own 2 feet?" His warriors stepped forward in unison without asking for any reward. "Right here, brother," offering nothing but unwavering loyalty. These were men absolutely loyal to Einar, known in Drone by a specific name, the vassals of the household. Satisfied as he looked at his brothers, Einar moved on to a more important task. "Good, perfect. Now we need to find one of you to enroll in St. Jansky University and protect our daughter. So among you." Looking around, he asked a question that instantly drained the fighting spirit from the entire group. "Who is confident in their written exams? Raise your hand." Amidst the whispering, a single hand went up confidently while the vassals flinched away from the challenge, finding it even scarier than a battlefield. "That's absurd. A written exam? I'd rather choose death." Just as no one else dared to step forward, Mord Eriksson Huskarl unexpectedly took on the mission. "I'll give it a try, my lord," prompting the system to display the warrior's name, Mord Eriksson Huskarl. Everyone patted Mord Eriksson on the shoulder and enthusiastically encouraged their brother. "Don't worry, brother. No matter how hard their exam is, how bad could it possibly be?" Einar instantly decided his future with a single sentence. "Good, go ahead, brother. From now on, you're a freshman in the Department of Physical Education." Mord Eriksson solemnly accepted the order and swore to protect Eurydice with his life. "Understood, my lord. I will protect Eurydice with my life." Mord Eriksson had carried out Einar's order from 2 months ago, making this man the one who secretly infiltrated the academy. Contrary to everyone's worries, he passed the entrance exam smoothly, exceeding expectations by passing with flying colors and getting accepted into the Department of Physical Education. Even so, Mord Eriksson's written exam scores were nothing to be proud of, as he naturally only scraped by with the bare minimum passing grade. Quite a few proctors had their jaws drop in shock at such an absurd feat. Mord Eriksson managed to enroll thanks to a physical score that far surpassed all other candidates, which was made possible by setting a new record in the practical exam, leaving the proctors staring in astonishment at his inhuman physical strength. Is this guy even a student? His stamina is unbelievable. And indeed, that overwhelming strength was the pride of the warriors loyal to Einar. The story of Mord Eriksson began on a cold winter day in January. After spending a long distance chasing the train on foot, having run after it for 2 whole days and nights without resting or closing his eyes. He was a freshman in the Department of Physical Education. Panting anxiously as he ran, Mord Eriksson shouted Esidici's name. Esidici, wait up for me. What scumbags dare lay a finger on my granddaughter? The interior of the train was reeking of corpses and charred ashes. Struggling to pull herself up in a daze, Esidici leaned against the wall and panted. What on earth is happening? She began to suspect, don't tell me it's bandits. Reflecting on it, Esidici grew anxious realizing she had no bodyguards by her side. What should I do? Because I threatened to disown anyone who followed me, I don't have a single escort beside me now. Suddenly, she cried out in joy upon seeing her instrument case was still completely intact. Clutching her beloved instrument, Esidici let out a sigh of relief. Thank goodness. Little bowstring case, I was worried you were broken. Suddenly, a strange sound from outside made her eyes widen in terror. The train door blasted open without warning, causing Esidici to scream in fright. The smoke gradually dissipated to reveal the intruders storming inside. Her arms trembled rhythmically. A terrorist spotted Esidici hiding nearby and flashed a sinister smile. Look what we have here. While his underlings looked at her with greedy eyes, what's that? Is that a girl? The leader, tortured to the point of despair by Ivan, begged for release. Just kill me. Calmly continuing to treat his wounds, Ivan replied, it's fine, you definitely won't die. While the man hugged Ivan's legs and tearfully begged for an end to his misery, kill me. Ivan gripped his blood-stained axe tightly, feigning distress at the desperate plea, don't say such scary things. His eyes flashed with an unprecedented cruelty. Bede thrashed in agony as Ivan poured a type of medicine onto his wound. Stop it. No more, do anything to me except that. He screamed in torment as his wounds were slowly corroded, while Ivan recalled a question once raised. What do frontline soldiers hate the most? With a barrage of answers flashing through his mind, hardtack rations, seniors, commanding officers, enemies, and Bede suffering through the medicine soaking into his wounds, recovery potions, as pain is best understood by those who have experienced it. At the hospital, a piercing scream echoed out, I'd rather you chop my arm right off. The nurse beside him tried to calm him down, don't say such scary things. If we leave it like this, we'll actually have to amputate your arm, Lord Ivan. Your body is a treasure of our nation. Ivan felt furious at being treated like a living experimental subject, thinking, who on earth treats a national treasure like this? Ivan recalled the first time he had to endure that terrible medicine from his youth when he lacked experience, remembering how the nurse poured the medicine onto his wound and gently encouraged him that he could hold on just one more time and to let her know if it hurt, after which he always tried his best to avoid getting severely injured. This cursed medicine forces you to experience the full agony of slow healing all at once. After testing the medicine's effects himself, Ivan discovered another use for it that was truly astonishing, leaving his comrades in the extermination squad unable to suppress their admiration. He repeatedly healed the wound and then resumed interrogating the leader, recovering through the medicine, interrogating again, and healing once more, making it truly. The leader completely broke down and begged, pleading that he didn't know anything else and begging to be killed, serving as a method that forces any prisoner to tell the truth, a flawless confession serum. Ivan refused the leader's plea for death, continuing to pour the medicine like watering a plant, and telling him he needed to stay alive since he was likely a tutorial boss with no reason to be killed. He kindly brought the surviving leader back to the train, nodding that while he was kind enough to carry him all the way there, the fact that the leader couldn't even remember who ordered the terrorist attack proved he was just a low-level cannon fodder soldier. Ivan deduced that someone had used magic to conceal the leader's memories, wondering if a cognitive impairment spell had been cast on him. He suddenly sensed an object hurtling toward him at a terrifying speed along a direct trajectory. Ivan focused on identifying the target of the incoming attack, wondering where it was aiming between his eyes. No. He realized the boulder was large enough to crush his entire head, his entire face. Damn it, he barely managed to lean out of the way and dodge it. Ivan knew that using a gun to counter such raw strength was utterly pointless, and trying to shoot back would be useless. He seriously evaluated the strength of whoever had thrown the boulder at him, realizing that hurling a rock with this much force meant they were far stronger than expected. A loud explosion echoed across the area, and thick black smoke obscured Ivan. Assuming the opponent also had enough experience to detect bloodlust and bullet trajectories, it was safe to assume the rival also knew how to sense incoming projectiles. Ivan looked toward the direction the boulder came from and issued a cold challenge, telling them to come out. Heavy, menacing footsteps slowly rang out. Mord Eriksson stepped out from the shadows with an oppressive aura capable of crushing others, grunting that it seemed he had quite a bit of skill. Ivan swung his axe and stepped back defensively. The man let out a cold laugh, explaining that commissioned by the king, Mord Eriksson had emerged with blinding rage over his tortured granddaughter, rebuking Ivan for being foolish enough to touch a single hair on her head compared to his actual skills. Ivan scoffed and lunged straight forward, realizing he had miscalculated because this guy wasn't a tutorial boss after all, but rather the boss's relative. He gripped his combat weapon tightly with both hands. Ivan issued a cold warning to Mord Eriksson before the battle began, telling him that for his own good he better know something, since after the whole terrorist incident this guy was the real mastermind. Mord Eriksson fiercely swung his axe straight forward. Ivan agilely dodged his attack. He was startled by Mord Eriksson's terrifying strength, finding it strange that this guy was so powerful. Ivan spun his weapon around in his hand a few times. He quickly launched a counterattack against the man's blows, wondering if his prediction had been wrong since he was certain this was supposed to be the tutorial section. Mord Eriksson reacted quickly and seized the upper hand, though Ivan managed to dodge just in time, shocked that someone committing robbery could possess this kind of skill, or wondering if someone else was pulling the strings from the shadows. The two sides clashed in a fierce, chaotic struggle. Their sharp weapons collided, creating harsh, screeching metallic noises. Ivan heightened his resolve for his goal concerning Princess Esidisi, one of the main characters. As he looked at Mord Eriksson, who was also fighting to win, the man was thinking of one person, his beloved granddaughter Esidisi. Both stood on different sides yet shared the same goal to save someone, swearing they had to rescue the girl. Meanwhile, elsewhere, an explosion sent up thick billowing smoke. Inside, several thugs were cornering Esidisi amidst her desperate pleas, pleading for them to please stop. One of them licked his lips despicably, remarking that he had thought she was just an ordinary survivor. Right as he was speaking, he took a heavy impact to the face, thinking it wasn't half bad. Esidisi had used her beloved violin to attack him, crying out in tearful apology as she struck him with her violin. Her blow sent the guy flying up to the ceiling where his head got stuck. The remaining two thugs witnessed the scene and muttered under their breath that she was formidable. Esidisi clutched her instrument while trembling, tears streaming down her face as she addressed them. She mourned for her violin, crying out that they had hurt Kang, her 2-year-old violin, calling them crazy bastards. Outside, Ivan recalled some information about her, noting that Princess Esidisi shared many traits with her mother, but her father was a real disaster. Esidisi sobbed while praising how wonderful her instrument had been. The robbers were caught slightly off guard, completely terrified by her previous strike as they shouted at each other to run away quickly to their boss. The girl raised her instrument high once more, charging at the thugs while shouting her violin's name in mourning, Kang. Her eyes overflowed with murderous intent as she vowed to avenge it, marking the exact moment the strongest music student on Earth was born. The battle on Ivan's side wasn't over yet, and amidst the clash, he heard a loud, approaching scream for help. Another thug was blasted into the air amid the shouts of his accomplices, screaming in madness that she was crazy and telling everyone to run. Ivan and Mord Eriksson paused their fight, distracted by the commotion as Ivan grew slightly worried and challenged the fleeing thugs, demanding to know what happened to the red-haired girl and whether Esidisi was safe, while Mord Eriksson echoed the exact same question about his granddaughter. The two of them suddenly realized they shared the exact same objective. Ivan jumped out of the skirmish and questioned the thug closely, asking if the person who used the recovery potion earlier wasn't his relative. The system suddenly popped up with the revelation that a train robbery in a school-themed story could never kill off a main character, because a helper would always appear to assist, making Ivan let out a soft realization as he confirmed if this guy was Esidisi's helper. Mord Eriksson slowly calmed down and asked with suspicion, demanding to know if he wasn't in cahoots with those bastards. Ivan instantly denied it, wondering why the man misunderstood, prompting Mord Eriksson to point out his reason for suspicion, that Ivan had just poured a healing potion on that bastard earlier. Ivan mentally recalled that it was one of the interrogation methods used by the extermination squad, remembering someone once yelling at him for it, asking if he was crazy for using medicine that way. After a brief silence, Ivan gave a vague explanation that he had some investigations to run, causing Mord Eriksson to understand and remark that he should have said so from the beginning. He quickly shifted his attention elsewhere. Mord Eriksson looked toward the furious Esidisi and shouted her name. He quickly checked on her, asking if his granddaughter was safe, to which she immediately recognized him and called out to her uncle. Ivan quietly observed them, thinking back to 7 years ago when he had first seen the target Esidisi. Images of Esidisi and her young voice flashed through his mind as she called out to her uncle, remembering she was just a child back then, though she probably still remembered him. Watching the two reunite, Ivan confirmed the target was safe, and her helper was fully capable of escorting her all the way to the academy, realizing it would cause major trouble if his identity got exposed here. Esidisi noticed the direction where he had been standing. Finding no one there except the thugs, she asked her uncle if someone had been standing there just now, unaware that Ivan had already left as it was time to retreat. Mord Eriksson silently stared in that direction. Recalling the previous battle, he deduced that the fighting style looked identical to the Krasilov Special Forces. Analyzing his opponent's movements, he thought the way the guy wielded his axe looked extremely familiar, bearing a striking resemblance to Senior Einar's axe technique. Piecing it together, Mord Eriksson arrived at the only name that fit all the criteria. If he came from Krasilov and learned axe techniques from Einar, it could only be one person, the hero candidate Ivan Petrovich. Rubbing his chin, he asked Esidice if she remembered anyone named Ivan, which instantly excited her as she happily confirmed that she definitely remembered Uncle Ivan. Walking together, Esidice excitedly described him as a great, kind, and cool guy, though Mord Eriksson replied that he wasn't so sure about the cool part. Hearing rumors that Ivan had died 2 years ago, Mord Eriksson remarked that he never would have recognized him if he hadn't shaved off his beard. Elsewhere, Ivan let out a NH letter 1EB9 relief sigh. Leaning his back against the wall and watching the flowing water, he mentally muttered that it was a tiring day for the amount of money earned. Einar's eldest daughter, Esidice, had arrived safely, likely dispatched as a Huskarl agent to ensure the target's successful security. Inside the magnificent and grand palace, a letter reported that Einar's eldest daughter had arrived safely, prompting Ivan to voice his approval with a single word. The letter continued with other updates. Isabel, the daughter of hero Maximilian from the Kingdom of Thils, set off during the first week of February, just days apart, while Oscar, the son of the knight Gilsvert, departed from the Kingdom of Thils, leading Ivan to assess that since their relations with those countries weren't bad and the distance was short, there was nothing to worry about. After all, the daughter of the mage Vialgrin was arriving by airship. Enrique's disciple, Lucia, was already inside the capital. Ivan leaned back into his chair in deep thought, muttering that since he really didn't want to run into her, this turned out for the best, wondering if clearing 2 more train hijacking incidents would finally bring the newbie tutorial section to a close. Biting the cap off his pen as he thought it over, he concluded that what he needed to do now was. He scribbled down the food items he wanted to eat upon returning to Earth, focusing solely on kimchi stew, or better yet, something even better. He circled a specific dish prominently, spicy rice cakes tteokbokki. Ivan meticulously described it, nodding it wasn't the delivery sauce style nor from any franchise brand, but specifically the kind sold right outside school gates. Lowering his head with a longing wish to go home, a face appeared outside his window glass accompanied by a voice asking if he was planning to abandon them again. Ivan immediately turned around to look at the source of the voice. Surprised, he asked her when she got there, recognizing her as 17-year-old Priscilla, an orphanage member who cheerfully replied that she had been there ever since the principal started mumbling about the foods he wanted to eat. Ivan stepped aside to dodge her and calmly asked how she even got up there. Priscilla confidently explained that she was in the graduation class and studied very hard in school, leaving Ivan in disbelief as he noted they were on the 3rd floor, silently questioning whether scaling walls was part of the orphanage curriculum. Walking outside together with Priscilla, who excitedly shouted that she won and asked if he knew it, Ivan reminded her to use the hallway next time because it was dangerous. Far off in a corner of the wall, a figure was observing Ivan's every move. It was a group of kids tracking him, playing their favorite game of trying to get close without getting caught by the principal. A boy threw a baseball hard toward Ivan, living up to the rumor that the man named Ivans could catch anything flying toward him from behind without even looking, and that he was a mysterious man who could find hiding children in a single round. The caught kid turned pale with shock. Above all else, Ivan walked over and picked the boy up, placing him on his shoulders, thinking how despite his appearance, his gentle personality made him one of the kid's best playmates, and Ivan had never stopped them from doing this. Everyone cheered happily when they saw the principal. All of it was part of Ivan's calculations, believing that if these kids could reach a level where they could bypass his senses, they would be able to stand firmly on their own 2 feet even after leaving this place. With 2 weeks left until the next group of hero kids boarded the train, he thought to himself that until then, it was freedom. That evening, heavy rain poured outside the window. Priscilla had been captured, shouting fiercely to warn them that if their principal found out they were dead meat, but the captors ignored her and demanded to know whose faction she belonged to, telling her to shut her mouth and stop talking about that old principal. Growing increasingly impatient, they demanded to know where she learned how to hide her presence like that. Asking who her principal actually was, Priscilla confidently blurted out the name Ivan Petrovich. Asking if they had heard of him before, the 2 captors mulled over the name Ivan Petrovich, before bursting into mocking laughter, asking who hadn't heard of him, disparaging the name by pointing out that Ivan was the most common name in Krasilov and Petrovich was the most common surname. Another voice chimed in from outside, telling them to hold on. A girl stepped forward with a serious tone, demanding to know who they had just mentioned. Priscilla broke down in tears, her voice trembling as she called out for the principal. Repeating Ivan's full name once more, Ivan Petrovich. At the same time, people from the orphanage rushed in to report to Ivan, informing him that a child from the orphanage had been kidnapped and asking if he remembered Priscilla, to which he replied that he did. Ivan observed the symbol left behind on a piece of cloth, a faint cross mark on Priscilla's clothing, recognizing it as the emblem belonging to that malicious organization. Expressing his own concern that while she was the person he least wanted to see, he had no other choice, meaning this would require some schedule adjustments. Knowing full well that place as a call from an old master, the place he once belonged to. After all, the extermination squad itself was created by her. The other person let out a mocking chuckle, remarking that the brat had claimed he was going to retire. Yet he was secretly building an assassination squad behind the scenes, and that woman was Enrique. Without hesitation, Ivan headed toward South Prizhinkaya, knowing only that the dungeon sewer built by Enrique was located there. Reaching the place in less than 3 hours, he looked up slightly, realizing it was his first time seeing it in person. Right in the center of Prizhinkaya's central garden stood a memorial with statues of the departing hero, the unknown hero, and the goddess of victory. One day after the demon king died and the war ended, the townspeople panicked upon realizing the unknown hero statue had suddenly vanished. Wondering how anyone could haul away an entire statue right in the middle of the capital and steal it without facing any consequences, realizing the only reason it was possible was because memorializing them was Enrique's right, since Kevika had been a member of the hero's party. Concluding that since they were blades too sharp to be used in peacetime, Enrique's disbandment of the extermination squad and her theft of the statue definitely meant something. Spotting something unfamiliar, Ivan wondered if that extra inscription had always been on the monument. Reading the lines carved into the stone, that even if their names were forgotten, their glory would last forever. Speaking on behalf of everyone not present, Ivan read out the names carved there: Elizaveta, Kirilovna, Krasilov, and Enrique. Ivan closed his eyes gently and lowered his head slightly, telling himself not to mourn those who departed before them. Opening his eyes after a brief pause, adding that it was because he stood in the exact same ranks as them. Several cracks appeared on the ground beneath him. A slight tremor shook the spot where Ivan stood. He stood still as if he had anticipated it. The circular platform lowered Ivan down into an underground room. A flat voice echoed from across the room, nodding that she still remembered it. Without even raising her head, Enrique already knew who had appeared, greeting little Ivan after 7 years since their last face-to-face meeting. Known as Enrique, the assassin of the former hero's party, Ivan recalled her glorious past from 100 years ago when she betrayed and drained the blood of the elder vampire who had bitten her, ending the reign of evil vampires across Prizhinkaya as a hero, while also operating as an assassin who took countless lives under the guise of fulfilling requests. And as the master swordsman who founded the extermination squad, his grandmaster. Earning her the title of a traitor, Enrique set down her teacup and noted he hadn't taken a single sip yet, teasing him by asking if he was afraid of being poisoned since it was getting cold, to which Ivan mentally replied that he didn't mind because he came from a country where people drank iced coffee. Keeping those thoughts to himself, he cut straight to the point and asked where Priscilla was, prompting Enrique to comment on how he always got straight to business just like always. Before advising him not to be so uptight, Enrique let out a mocking laugh, saying that it made him look so amateurish. Ivan shivered as a blade was thrown right toward him. Enrique's gaze turned intensely sharp, as she remarked that she remembered teaching him that such hostility should be reserved strictly for prey. A snake formed from spiritual energy crawled along with her calm voice as she said, "Don't worry about that child. I haven't bitten her yet, and I'm taking very good care of her." By this time, Ivan could already feel the oppressive murderous intent, prompting Enrique to continue questioning. "Now it's your turn to answer." She wanted to know clearly what on earth he was plotting. Receiving no answer, Enrique grew slightly impatient and asked again, "I'm asking what you're plotting by gathering all those orphans together." She thought to herself, "You brat, when I heard you adopted an orphan after retiring, I actually thought it was so cute." But things didn't seem that simple, and training an agent capable of executing ambush techniques to perfection in just 2 years before sending her over felt essentially like an act of defiance, as if to tell her that he was opening a murder training facility right in their own backyard. Enrique felt that this was definitely a declaration of war, right? Still staring intently at Ivan, she added that deep down she was actually a bit disappointed. "It hurts, you know," she thought, looking him up and down from head to toe to evaluate him. "And what's with that silly mustache? It's driving me crazy. Why is he wearing clothes that went out of style a whole century ago? Don't tell me that's a disguise." Seeing Ivan's serious, if looks could kill reaction only made her more displeased as she continued, "I invited you here because I didn't want to fight, yet you're giving me this if you touch me you die attitude. What on earth are you thinking? At that moment, Ivan was also wondering what to do about this situation, thinking, Enrique, what am I plotting? Just how much of this am I supposed to tell her? He slowly analyzed, 4 years after the Demon King's death, the kingdom of Krasilov looks peaceful on the outside, but it's actually split in two. Getting caught up in the struggle for the throne between the crown prince, who was ready to risk starting an external war, and Princess Elizaveta, who sought to maintain internal peace. To prevent a war, the princess even redeployed an agent who had faked his death to ensure the key figures enrolling in the Grand Academy graduate safe. And that agent is me, Ivan thought, still not quite grasping her intent when she asked what he was plotting. Ivan had a million questions running through his head. Enrique knows full well I'm carrying out the mission assigned by Elizaveta, but why is she asking about the details of my mission? Could it be that Enrique is no longer on Elizaveta's side? A possibility crossed Ivan's mind. If so, don't tell me this woman has sided with the crown prince. Both Ivan and Enrique Kevika stood on opposite sides while harboring the exact same question toward each other. What on earth is that lunatic thinking? What on earth is that lunatic thinking? After a moment of silence, Ivan finally spoke up. I heard you're raising a disciple and she's scheduled to enroll at St. Jansky University. This was the only approach he could think of right then. Right? This is something we can resolve through conversation. Enrique wanted to hear more, prompting, and then Ivan smoothly went along with it. My client has shown interest, and if she accidentally gets hurt, it would be a massive loss for the nation, so they told me to look after your disciple. Ivan mentally scrambled. That's the exact job Elizaveta gave me. She knows full well how the princess operates. Unless she's sided with the crown prince, she has to understand what I'm hinting at. And precisely as intended, Enrique understood all those words from her perspective. You said you're raising a disciple, bam. I've already grasped her identity, location, and personal info, so they told me to look after your disciple, meaning I'm targeting your disciple. A moment later, Ivan bolted upright, thinking this should be enough for her to understand, while Enrique on the other end slammed the table and sprang to her feet, shouting, this brat is targeting my disciple. Looking outside, she gave an order, Lucia, come in. At the call, the door quickly crept open as a voice answered, yes, master. Enrique commanded, now go say hello. This is your senior brother, and the girl immediately obeyed, saying, I've heard so much about you. The moment Ivan laid eyes on her, he had to blurt out a question, are you even human? Do you know what race your master is? Lucia responded to him clearly, yes, I know my master is human. She further introduced, even though my master has to live on a somewhat unique diet, she is a true hero who loves me and protects this country. If you ask me what defines a race, I would answer that it's humanity. Hearing that, Ivan could only let out an "oh." The scene left him somewhat astonished, because ever since the war with the demon race, the kingdom had always maintained a hostile attitude toward non-human races, making the girl's open-minded attitude a rare sight. At that moment, Enrique stood up, speaking with a tone of deep satisfaction. She is my pride and joy, someone far better than me. No, better than all of us. A precious child I was blessed with in the twilight years of my life. That is why. Enrique stepped forward with a line that sounded almost like she wanted him to trust her. I don't want to kill you, Ivan. Ivan also slowly picked up his weapon and stood up, knowing that everything ultimately had to lead to this. Pointing his weapon right at her with a cold voice, he demanded, if you're still shaking hands with the royal family, then I'll use the memories between us to ask you one thing. Where does your loyalty lie? Ivan threw out the sharp question, what price did Alexander pay, people, blood, or territory? This remark took Enrique by surprise as she countered, weren't you the one shaking hands with Alexander? Hearing that, Ivan was stunned. What on earth are you talking about? I've never once met that man with a smile on my face. Both came to a halt, the fighting spirit that had just been ignited fading away. Enrique pressed her hands down on the table as the room fell into a silence, so profound you could hear a pin drop. She sat back down in her chair and complained with a sigh, this really drains all my energy. Every time we talk it's always like this. Why is the world so fair? If only you'd grant me a bit more eloquence. While Ivan didn't know how to reply, thinking, it's not like that. Lucia didn't understand what was going on but chimed in cheerfully, I think you two look really good together, prompting Enrique to snap back. What on earth are you talking about? Ivan let out a sigh of relief and finally picked up his coffee cup, thinking, with this level of stress, it's enough to make me want to ask Princess Elizaveta for overtime pay. Taking a quiet sip of his coffee, he confirmed to himself, anyway, the problem's been resolved. Even when the tutorial phase began, Enrique's disciple wouldn't fall into any major danger because Enrique herself would protect the girl. The future student of St. Jansky University, Lucia, teased Enrique at that moment. Master's murderous intent is no joke. As expected of a former assassin from the hero's party, to which Enrique brushed it off vaguely, whatever. Meanwhile, Ivan kept watching them and her master. He remarked that they looked more like mother and daughter than master and disciple. meaning the parent-teacher conference had concluded smoothly without a single hitch. At that point, Enrique grew a bit curious and asked, "By the way, Ivan, why on earth did you go teach ambush techniques to those orphans?" To which Ivan immediately explained, "I never taught them that. They were just struggling every possible way to find jobs after graduating," making Enrique realize, "Ah, right, they learned it on their own." With that conversation concluded, he had walked a fairly long distance with Priscilla afterward, meaning this place was quite far from the orphanage. From the very beginning, why on earth did Priscilla bother coming all this way just to end up right in the crosshairs of Enrique's subordinates? As they walked, Priscilla softly called out to him, "Director." Looking timid with her eyelashes damp with tears, she asked, "Is it possible, I mean truly just possibly, are you getting ready to go away somewhere?" Her question led Ivan to deduce, "A government agent came to see me after I spent 2 full years staying exclusively at the orphanage, and lately I've also been frequently absent from the orphanage. Is that why she thinks I'm about to leave? No, it probably isn't because of something like that. It's likely just because the kids have seen right through my deepest thoughts." Finished with his thoughts, Ivan gave a subtle nod. He gave Priscilla an answer, "I suppose I will be leaving." The sobbing beside him erupted the moment Ivan finished speaking, as Priscilla couldn't hold back her tears and wailed, "Don't go, I wish you wouldn't go. I mean, if the director disappears, we'll be left all alone again." Hearing her heartfelt words, Ivan understood. So that's how it is. This war orphan must have thought her home was about to vanish. Everything finally became clear. That was why the girl had rushed out to the city center to look for a job, and because she walked without making a sound, she got mistaken for a professionally trained agent. Too bad it turned out like this, Ivan thought as he draped his coat over her shoulders, prompting Priscilla to ask anxiously, "Where are you going?" Ivan stayed silent without answering, but the answer was already clear in his heart. "I definitely want to leave this otherworldly realm." However, a moment later he replied, "I am nomming a location, going to St. Jansky University. Don't worry, I'll come back to visit the school often." Hearing that reply, Priscilla stopped crying, looking up at him with a faint smile as she thought, "It's not like I can go right this second anyway, but I don't necessarily have to do it right now either. I've poured way too much heart and soul into this place." Back at the orphanage, Ivan's voice announced, "So it looks like it'll take about 3 years for me to completely return." Elsewhere, a small hand slammed down on a desk. "St. Jansky University. I heard the entrance exam is super hard, and next year's entrance exam is this coming November, so." Priscilla declared with confidence, "That means if we go there, we can meet him again in just 1 more year. The rules of the game remain the same as before. Don't let the director find out. And don't get caught." Their objective this time was that whoever got accepted into the school first would win. And just like that, all the children of St. Vasilisa Orphanage entered cram school mode to pass the exam for St. Jansky University. Reading through some documents, Ivan remarked that everything was progressing smoothly. Esidice, the berserker of the hero's party and daughter of King Einar. Lucia, Enrique's disciple and the vampire assassin of the hero's party. Ivan's gaze suddenly turned serious and, right on the tracks was a train. A sword stood upright. The next person Ivan turned his attention to was Isabel, the hero's daughter. Night blanketed the forest, housing a cabin within, as the hero's party was essentially an assassination squad. Because they had to infiltrate deep into enemy territory to target the leaders of the Demon King's army, requiring them to be extremely silent. Maximilian observed his handiwork and broke into a satisfied smile. Though he didn't get to feel proud for long before someone chucked a piece of wood right at his head with a painful thud, accompanied by a scolding, "You're out of your mind." Enrique marched forward complaining, "Why don't you just walk around and scream at the top of your lungs instead? Scream that the hope of the Allied Kingdom is right here." While a voice chimed in from behind her, "All right." Enrique quickly spun around to observe what the other person was doing. Gilles Vert drew his sword and slashed a circle around himself, competing as he stated, "I can't lose." A few more cracks appeared across the sky, prompting Enrique to yell angrily, "You two are truly unbelievable." Finished with his display, Gilles Vert coolly slicked back his hair and looked satisfied. "Seems like I slashed more this time. A good warm-up, right?" To which Enrique reminded him, "Your wrist is broken, you know." Gilles Vert casually held out his broken hand toward the person nearby. "Patricia, heal me," leaving her unhappy with his attitude as she retorted, "I find that phrasing rather insulting." At that moment, one of them suddenly burst out laughing in amusement. Einar was eager to show off his skills, declaring, "A true man of drone lives to leave his mark on the world," while the guys in the back saw the commotion and tried to stop him. "I really wish you wouldn't do that, don't," as Einar had already locked onto the mountain ahead as his target. A single strike from him split the mountain wide open in no time, and thanks to that, they swarmed out afterward like bees from a shattered hive. "We had an extremely hard time escaping from the Iron Dragon General," and the Demon King's army. I still remember that ridiculous escape like it was yesterday. Up in the sky, those cracks from earlier were still there. The hero, Maximilian, scratched the back of his head with one hand while pointing up at the sky with the other, saying, I split the sky in half. And that was just the kind of person Maximilian was. Gilsvert chimed in to compete to the end, I slashed more. While Einar added, I chopped a whole mountain in half. He continued, that's right, instead of slashing something formless and intangible, isn't slashing something tangible an even greater miracle? Prompting Enrique to warn them, rambling on with grandiose words isn't going to make you any smarter. The hero's party was a nest of lunatics, as Enrique grabbed Einar by the scruff of his neck while Einar flailed wildly despite her yelling, I'm gonna die, leading Ivan to assess Maximilian as the craziest of the lot, yet also the one who shone the brightest. He looked over at Ivan sitting in a corner back then, thinking, you, the hero, dared to risk splitting the midnight sky in half for no particular reason, only to say he did it just because he wanted to look at the stars. I really don't like that hero. For some unknown reason, that man defeated the Demon King 4 years ago and suddenly vanished, cutting off all contact with the world. Even so, the world still remembered the hero, but they were forgetting the man named Maximilian. Right now inside the train carriage, the person sitting opposite noticed him deep in thought and spoke up, Lord Ivan, is something bothering you? Prompting Ivan to quietly reply, you know. Before turning his attention to everyone sitting in the carriage, all of you. Ivan let out a sigh as he recalled what happened back then, when a troublesome situation arose. The day I returned after stopping the terrorist attack, a voice filled with surprise echoed from within, a terrorist attack actually happened. How on earth did you know in advance? Dmitri was astonished by Ivan's ability, and you even pinpointed the exact date, time, and location. He walked over, grabbed Ivan by the arms, and pleaded, next time you go out, we'll send agents from the counterintelligence command to assist you. Would about 5 people be enough? Which happened because I made them suspicious. Dmitri silently begged in his heart, tell me, I'm asking out of genuine curiosity, how on earth did you set up an intelligence network without us knowing anything about it? Which to Ivan was fairly simple. It was a natural reaction, considering that he, a man retired for 4 years, had predicted a terrorist attack targeting the nation's key figures. He didn't need anything too complicated. He simply predicted it based on familiar tropes, but to that guy, it probably looked like he had a transnational secret intelligence organization backing him up. Meaning if he didn't provide a reasonable explanation, it would lead to a dozen annoying troubles in the future. But consequently, there was no need to reveal the truth, because authority inherently stems from mystery. However, the result was, Ivan gritted his teeth in anger. The result is that I ended up getting support from 5 clumsy agents who are definitely here to spy on me. As he growled out, listen up. But Ivan wondered from the start, why on earth do intelligence agents wear identical outfits like this? As he grew impatient, I can't take this anymore. Ivan continued chewing them out. And while there are plenty of empty seats, you guys clustered so close together that anyone could tell you're suspicious. He criticized them. How am I supposed to enjoy my retirement in peace when people calling themselves agents are this sloppy? The more he lectured the rookies, the higher Ivan's anger climbed. Let me tell you. Back when I was your age, thus a story began inside the train carriage. After countless long, dragging hours, the train finally showed signs of slowing down. The moment they got off, they lined up neatly, reporting, then, per your instructions, we'll take our leave now, Lord Ivan. Ivan felt he hadn't lectured them long enough, so he kept up his commanding tone to find fault. You're still using the word we. Express yourselves clearly, act decisively, and always keep your true intentions buried in the deepest place. Back when I was in the extermination squad, while the agent smiled on the outside but screamed on the inside, Lieutenant Colonel Dmitri, I heard this uncle was extremely quiet. In what universe is this considered quiet, for crying out loud? He's a monster. He's been talking non-stop for 18 hours straight without resting for even a single second. Catching the final cue, the bunch of them bolted away on all fours, leaving Ivan to finally feel at ease, thinking they finally retreated. Ivan deduced Dmitri probably told them to spy on him, but thinking back, yesterday he had to play the role of a terrifying kindergarten teacher. And along with teaching them a lesson they'd never forget, he also gave them an excuse to leave this place. Ivan recalled the instructions he was given beforehand. All of you, protect Oscar, the night's son. He turned around and muttered to himself admiringly. I managed to shake off my surveillance while also protecting a member of the hero's party. It feels like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Ivan quickly shifted his attention to a blonde girl stepping onto the train, seemingly recognizing her face. Inside the carriage, Isabel was gazing out the window. At that moment, someone walked up and placed a hand on her shoulder. My lady, please don't worry, he'll always. Before he could finish, Isabel shoved his hand away from her body. She glared at him with sharp eyes. Shut up, you stupid good-for-nothing. He maintained his respectful demeanor. My lady, while Isabel cut him off again. "Get lost. I don't even want to look at your face anymore." As he walked away, Isabel still hurled insults after him, calling him a fool. The person stepped outside and gently pulled the door shut. He couldn't take it anymore, his face twisting as he gritted his teeth in pure anger. This train had departed from St. Mataline as an express train heading straight toward the capital. Because this region was located close to the front line against the demon hordes, most of the areas it passed through were heavily guarded military zones. Out of the 30 stations, only 3 carried a high probability of terrorist attacks. The first stop served as a suitable location for an ambush, but the second stop was an ideal spot for a raid, yet absolutely nothing happened. And now came the final stop. Some passengers on the train had already dozed off to catch some rest. The entire carriage sank into a heavy silence amid the pitch-black night. Ivan felt a hint of shock, wondering what was going on and if his prediction had been wrong, questioning whether the newbie tutorial section was supposed to default to a train terrorist attack. So was Esidisi's incident just a random anomaly? No way, the initial design elements of a school-themed story were always standardized. Ivan considered another possibility, wondering if this wasn't a school story after all, thinking, damn it, would this damn alternate world ever actually end? People scrambled out of the train in complete panic as a bearded guy angrily pointed a handgun at them, shouting about terrorists and a terrorist attack at the final stop. Ivan asked himself what would happen if that ending was meant exclusively for the main character, or if the hero hadn't gone into hiding at all, but had instead returned to his own world after seeing the ending. A question popped into his head. What would happen to the other world left behind in his wake? He looked at Kim Sunwoo's reflection in the glass, wondering, what about me? The train sped onward toward its final stop along the route. Ivan frantically denied the thought, refusing it and declaring he hated this, vowing he didn't want to stay in this damn world a single second longer. His mind spiraled further into panic as he wanted to let go of everything, wishing to let go, wanting to let go, wanting to leave, wanting to depart, wanting to lie down on a cozy bed inside a warm house with a well-functioning fireplace, wrapping himself in a warm blanket amidst a world of games, novels, movies, and TV shows, and sleeping straight through an entire week, terrified of dying and wanting to live no matter what, determined at all costs to return to where he used to live. Swearing he had to make it happen because he couldn't take it anymore, wondering what he should do now with those gears and affirmations, and wishing he could just talk to people who spoke Korean about games and entertainment programs. Kim Sunwoo's reflection screamed wildly in the mirror, trapped far away from where the concepts of welfare and entertainment were practically non-existent, stuck inside this damn pre-modern fantasy world. Kim Sunwoo gripped his own throat with his hands, desperate to get out of here. Ivan stared with his eyes wide in absolute astonishment. The glass pane right in front of him fractured into massive, jagged pieces. Right at that moment, an explosion tore through the area. The glass right in front of Ivan shattered and scattered everywhere in fragments. The train carriages derailed one after another. The train and the panicking figure of Kim Sunwoo vanished. Isabel was rocked by the explosion, losing her balance and tumbling down. Ivan assessed his own physical condition and braced himself to do what Ivan Petrovich had to do, nodding how his head, heart, and fingertips had all turned ice cold. He compared the sensation to the harsh winter of Krasilov, just like that endless dark night, cold, silent, and meticulous. Ivan grew certain of one thing. The tutorial compliance section wasn't over yet, meaning his guess hadn't been wrong. He calmly stepped out of the utterly blown to smithereens train carriage. Hope flared up in Ivan's mind once more, though the ending still loomed ahead. Not long after, the train was reduced to nothing more than a pile of wreckage. Dust billowed thickly through the ruined carriages. Isabel stirred at that moment, letting out a soft groan of pain. Isabel fluttered her eyes open with difficulty, wondering what on earth had happened. Water droplets trickled down onto her face as a voice asked if she was awake yet, milady. The man lifted his face to look straight up, leaving Isabel stunned. Someone was holding back the heavy debris on his back to protect her, and as the wreckage caved in further, he groaned in pain and called out to her as milady. She remembered this person. He was the very guy she had chased away earlier. Isabel wondered why he was. The man hurriedly urged her to run, telling her that her life was their target, while Isabel stubbornly refused to let someone else sacrifice themselves for her, telling him to leave her behind and flee. She let out a cold laugh, asking if he was actually an idiot and why he would save someone like her, admitting she knew he must hate her guts. Isabel brought up the most likely possibility at the moment, asking if he did it just because he thought her father would fly into a rage if she died, before dismissing it herself by saying he didn't understand since that man didn't care about anyone at all. But he seemed to be doing it for a different reason, which she recognized. The man continued expressing his true feelings, explaining that he had never cared whether that man worried or not, simply because she was the hero's daughter and she was the last remaining hope. Carried by the man known as Maximilian, Isabel couldn't believe what she was hearing, asking what on earth he was talking about. At that moment, a voice chimed in with admiration. Ivan walked over and hoisted the heavy debris pressing down on the man's back. Ivan asked the knight for his name and the man managed to choke out his identity, Diane August. When asked in return, Ivan didn't hesitate to give his name, Ivan Petrovich. Ivan asked if he wanted to live, prompting Diane August to pant heavily and answer that if it was possible. Hearing the response, Ivan popped the cap off a bottle of medicine, warning him that it was going to hurt badly. With sheer iron willpower, Knight Diane August pushed through the agony of the recovery potion, a method Isabelle noted down in her mind just like that. As Ivan poured the medicine onto his wounds, Diane August let out a blood-curdling scream, begging to be killed and offering to spill everything about the Knight Order's accounting books, prompting an unbearable Isabelle to snap at him and ask if he had lost his mind. Diane August turned to Isabelle and shouted her name, wishing she hadn't been born the hero's daughter, only for her to mercilessly slap him across the face and call him a fool. Diane August passed out cold without rambling any further, managing to squeeze out just one last word, mother. Assessing the situation, Ivan concluded that the shock had triggered a mental regression in him, telling Isabelle that since it was her fault for hitting him, she needed to reflect on her own actions. With that, he looked off into the distance, noting that the people who had ambushed them along the path were arriving, meaning they needed to prepare, and telling her to carry the knight on her back while he handled the fight. Isabelle drew her sword and assumed a fighting stance, declaring that she could fight too. Her sword-holding hand trembled in waves. Ivan let out a sigh, remarking that her aptitude wasn't bad, but it wasn't necessary, which deeply offended Isabelle as she demanded to know if he even knew her, asking when they had ever agreed to drop formal honorifics old man. Ivan brushed it off, turning away to remark that she seemed to have inherited her mother's personality rather than her father's, prompting a surprised Isabelle to ask if he knew her father, to which Ivan simply replied. Without answering her, he issued orders to the surrounding survivors to gather together, start a fire, and tear up the train seats to use as blankets, warning that winter nights in this region were much harsher than she thought, though Isabelle doubted it, asking what they would do about the ambush if they lit a fire. Ivan didn't bother explaining further, telling her that wasn't something she needed to worry about, leading Isabelle to guess that he was planning to go alone and asking if he didn't even know who the enemy was. Ivan replied in a flat tone, saying that wasn't something she needed to worry about either. Ivan looked up at the full moon high in the sky, recalling a saying from tactical doctrine, choose the least harmful option and execute the most optimal action. He used to look down on it as a statement so obvious it made him laugh, but actual combat was where you truly grasped its real meaning. Assuming the worst-case scenario and executing the optimal action meant knowing the enemy would always try to attack in the hardest way to deal with. When a train derailed, the enemy would naturally assume the survivors would run away, and in that case, the enemy would pursue them because from the target's perspective, the absolute worst-case scenario was getting ambushed by pursuers while fleeing. This raised a major question. What was the countermeasure? It was placing the target right in the most conspicuous position possible for the enemy. Ivan quickly analyzed the situation, concluding that the enemy would now regroup the forces they had scattered for the pursuit, because they would be forced to switch tactics from chasing to encircling. They would organize an attack and surround the target, so he would execute the most optimal action in response. Based on that logic, assuming the worst-case scenario, and taking the optimal action meant that if the worst possible opponent existed for him, it meant he had to naturally become a similarly terrifying existence to the enemy. In short, embracing the exact kind of attack he least wanted to face. Handgun sniping. The shooting technique was designed so that extermination squad operatives could launch long-range attacks using nothing more than handguns, and throw them back at opponents. The thugs quickly took direct hits from Ivan's bullets. They began frantically searching for the source of the gunfire, screaming in panic that Anov was down, demanding to know where the shooter was and telling them to step out. Ivan's plan officially kicked off as the enemy organized their assault to encircle the target. In a dark forest like this, a lit torch inherently served as a brilliant target marker. The thugs were taken down one by one until they spotted a flying weapon being thrown at them, an axe. One of them lunged toward the direction the axe was hurled from, screaming for it to die. Another guy was split right down the middle. Ivan picked off each enemy one by one without any hesitation. The motion of retrieving his axe and sliding it back into his holster was swift and clean. Letting out a breath after wiping out that bunch, he noted that a surprise raid by the extermination squad allowed a single individual to completely surround an entire group. Holding their torches, the remaining thugs scanned every direction with extreme vigilance. One of them hurried over to report to the leader that they had been hit again, informing him that all 3 victims had reportedly been slashed by an axe, causing the leader to let out a cold snort as he muttered that he had sent troops straight toward the gunshot sounds, yet Pondering for a moment, he noted that since they were easily subduing the pursuit team he sent out, they might be an elite, small-scale commando unit, revealing himself as Ifellos, a centurion under the 6th Iron Dragon General's Guards Infantry Division. He listened closely in silence, using his ears to pinpoint the targets from the west and north. Ifellos accurately tracked the positions, noting that the gunfire was slowly closing in around this location, wondering if they knew where they were and thinking it couldn't be. He ordered a subordinate to hand over their gun. Ifellos fired a shot into the sky before making a swift, confident assertion that there was only one enemy. Someone voiced a skeptical denial, saying it was impossible because multiple gunshots had clearly come from different directions, prompting Ifellos to ask if they still didn't get it. Right at that moment, several strings suddenly appeared. They were hooked onto a boot. Ifellos loudly explained that it was a trap, angrily roaring that those were simply the sounds of their own gunfire echoing back. Hearing a commotion behind him, a subordinate spun around. An axe blade came flashing forward and slashed straight across his neck. Ifellos continued explaining to his remaining subordinates, pointing out that the first shot was just fired to test whether he had bullet trajectory perception, noting that they had reacted too quickly by sending the pursuit team right where the bastard wanted, meaning those gunshots were meant as a decoy from the very beginning. A nearby subordinate hesitantly wondered if the hero's daughter could really orchestrate all of this by herself, asking who on earth could pull off such a feat alone, to which Ifellos repeated her title, the hero's daughter. He recalled the past, remembering the absurd martial arts prowess and stating she would still be a monster even with just half of his strength. Finishing his thought, Ifellos ordered everyone to gather up and mobilize the entire force to hunt down that bastard, receiving a crisp acknowledgement from his subordinate. He added that he would move independently, leaving his subordinate slightly surprised as he stammered out a confused response. Torches flickered faintly against the night sky. The lucky survivors from the train carriage huddled around a campfire, crying that they were all going to die and screaming in terror for their mothers. Isabel looked at Diane August with worry, begging him to wake up as he remained in a dazed, out-of-it state, mumbling about glowing fireflies. But at that moment, an event unfolded that caused Isabel's pupils to dilate to their absolute limit. A smug laugh rang out from behind them. Strutting forward, Ifellos proudly introduced himself as a centurion of the 6th Iron Dragon General's Guards Infantry Division. Locking his sights onto Isabel, he declared he would personally deal with the hero's daughter. The night grew darker as the full moon climbed higher. Wearily sitting under the trunk of a large tree, Ivan tried recalculating the enemy numbers, noting that excluding the commander who possessed bullet trajectory perception, there were a total of 50 deployed soldiers. Blood continued to drip in droplets from his axe blade. Raising his head to look at the scattered corpses sprawled out before him, he muttered that he had practically got the hang of most of it. He then expertly strapped his axe back onto his waist. Leaning against a massive tree trunk as he walked past the corpses littering the ground, he felt even more confused, wondering if this really was a school story. With his serious gaze fixed straight ahead unchanged, he figured that since the main characters were enrolling right now, this definitely had to be the tutorial phase, but the difficulty of this tutorial was way too high. Recalling fragments of Esidici's gameplay and dismissing them, he thought Esidici's tutorial was so easy he could beat it with one hand, since the enemies were a bunch of weaklings who didn't even know how to use bullet trajectory perception to seize the enrollment train. But then Ivan's super memory brought up the events tied to Isabel in the game, realizing that simply escaping a train buried under a landslide was already a massive hurdle, even if the original game provided some kind of puzzle to help you break out. His mind pictured it all as mandatory combat game graphics, followed by an unidentified elite squad launching a sudden attack without even bothering to explain the combat system. He then contemplated the worst-case scenario awaiting her against Ifellos, especially since the boss turned out to be a formidable enemy capable of using bullet trajectory perception. Walking step by step through the woods while thinking as thoroughly as possible, he recalled that some games featured tutorial bosses you were forced to lose to, but these guys were genuinely trying to kill Isabel. Suddenly, his footsteps halted on the ground, thinking unless a supporting NPC showed up to save her, wait, no way. Ivan's blue eyes widened in sheer disbelief as he whispered, "Am I that supporting NPC?" With a powerful burst, he shot forward like a bullet, thinking that if he truly was nothing more than an NPC, the kind of character who didn't even show up in the ending credits. He leaped effortlessly up into the towering tree trunk, wondering if that meant he would never get an ending, and whether it implied he could never return to the real world. Clutching his face in momentary despair, he rested his hand against the tree and weighed two main issues. First, Why was the tutorial difficulty this chaotic? And second, would Isabelle actually die if a supporting NPC wasn't there? After a moment, Ivan relied on his gaming and novel-reading experience to arrive at a conclusion, realizing there was only one way to find out. Standing atop the windy tree, he gazed toward the orange glow flickering in the distance. Isabelle stood gripping her sword in confrontation against Ifellos, who mocked her disbelief, stepping forward to boast that he had prepared extremely thoroughly since she was the hero's daughter. Ifellos sneered as he watched her standing before him, taunting her for being way too weak. Even so, Isabelle clutched her sword tightly, staring at him with exhausted fury, bracing herself even as she faced death. Ivan looked down from the tree with a cold, resolute expression, reminding himself that he wouldn't interfere either. She lunged forward once more to clash with Ifellos, but he easily blocked her strike using just one hand on his blade. Ifellos parried her blows while chatting casually, remarking that he often saw people like her who thought attacking faster and smoother was all it took just because they memorized the training manual. But he immediately shot the idea down, telling her she was wrong, which only infuriated her further as she screamed at him to shut up. Ifellos' words left the civilians hiding behind them pale with anxious dread as he noted she was the hero's daughter, adding that a slash was meaningless if it failed to hit the opponent, marveling at how big the hero's daughter had grown. Ifellos showed no mercy, delivering a horizontal slash right across Isabelle's face that made her wince as she raised her sword to block the blow. His gaze and voice were filled with utter contempt as he looked down at Isabelle, remarking how pathetic it was that the hero's daughter had grown this big without ever experiencing real combat. Her inner rage was provoked, driving her to charge back into the fight with even more fury as she shouted at him to shut up. But the very next second, Isabelle's familiar longsword was forcefully swatted away. The sword plunged straight into the ground a good distance away from both Ifellos and her. With his sharp blade now pointed straight at Isabelle's chest, he muttered that he had lost good soldiers for nothing, and that this whole thing should have ended much sooner. Fellows kept his sword aimed at her, his low voice dripping with menace as he declared that unlike the hero, she couldn't protect anyone, asking the hero's daughter if she had any last words. A look of profound sorrow crossed Isabelle's face as she mentally repeated that single word, the hero. Suddenly, a voice echoed from behind, making her turn back in surprise as it told her not to try and become a hero. From a distance, the figure and voice of Diane August became increasingly clear, as he stated that we call him a hero not because he was the strongest, but because he was the bravest, causing her to recognize him in sheer astonishment as Lord Diane August. Diane August's eyes stared fixedly at the ground, speaking with almost no hope as he said that we must never become heroes, recalling the knight's oath he had sworn on the battlefield over 10 years ago. We aren't even allowed to try because we must always remain acutely aware of our own weaknesses. As he knelt in the solemn palace with his gaze glued to the tiled floor, the memory replayed of how they were forbidden from trying to be heroes, standing before the king who held a sword with both hands and solemnly recited the oath, words that remained deeply etched in his heart even after losing his mind. That symbolic sword lightly touched Diane August's chest as if to firmly seal the oath, to stand by the weak and view people like them through the lens of the weak, fulfilling the knight's oath of the kingdom of Thils. It was then that she finally realized it and bravely spoke up, declaring that she would do just that, having finally recognized through acceptance just how weak she truly was. Losing his patience, Ifellos swung his blade straight at Isabelle, telling her that if she had no last words she should just die, but she managed to drop and roll flat against the ground to dodge the fatal strike, remembering that they must acknowledge their own weakness and that the only reason they swing their swords is because it is the right thing to do. Isabelle sprang back up without fear, lunging for her sword to retrieve it, driven by the conviction that they do it because a greater cause must be protected. That reckless moment of hers also terrified the vulnerable civilians she was protecting behind her, but she knew it was no different from giving charity to the poor or helping a wounded person stand up, simply because it was the right thing to do and because it was justice. Enraged that she refused to go down, he swung his blade harder, shouting for the Knights of Thils to listen. But right at that moment, Isabelle managed to grab the hilt of her sword, telling him that he didn't stand there for courage but for humility. She quickly parried another dangerous strike just in time. Isabelle's hands trembled slightly from the heavy impact and sheer exhaustion, reminding herself that doing good has always been a simple and natural thing. Her entire body suddenly began to gleam amidst her fiery anger as she declared that in the name of justice, she draws her sword. In the blink of an eye, Isabelle swiftly overwhelmed Ifellos. He was beaten back by her overwhelming strength, barely managing to block her onslaught. Realizing his end was near, Ifellos felt a wave of bitter disbelief, gasping in shock that this couldn't be happening. With an expression fueled by pure courage, Isabel clutched her sword and charged right at him. Their metal blades clashed violently, sending a piercing screech ringing through the air. But the very next second, Isabel successfully drove her sword straight into Ifelos's body. His blood immediately began to stream from the wound down onto the ground. His body slowly sank to the earth as Ifelos clutched his injury, grumbling in bitter resentment that after having to deal with her heroic father, he was now being stabbed by the hero's own daughter. A moment later, overwhelmed by the severity of his wounds, he collapsed. A cold, warning voice came from Isabel as she stated clearly that she was not the hero's daughter. Her turquoise eyes looked down as she corrected him, proclaiming that she was Isabel, the daughter of Maximilian. Gathering what little breath he had left, Ifelos rasped out that he understood. Exhausted, Isabel let out a long sigh of relief and slumped down onto the ground, muttering that she was completely spent. She used her sword to prop herself up from collapsing entirely, but the surrounding civilians watched the scene unfold with overwhelming joy, realizing all the survivors had made it out safely as they cheered that they had made it and survived, thanking the heavens. Immediately after, a voice echoed from behind offering praise for a job well done. She watched Ivan walk over, his body smeared with blood, and asked him with lingering curiosity about the rest of the enemies. Hearing that, he simply replied that this guy was the last one. Hearing his answer, Isabel let out another sigh of relief and sat heavily on the ground, marveling at how incredible that truly was, though Ivan remained nonchalant, remarking that who could really say. Watching her sitting on the ground, his expression softened as he figured out that this terrorist attack was probably just the standard awakening event, the kind meant for the tutorial phase. A tragic shattered scene flashed through his mind, realizing that according to the usual cliché tropes, all the survivors, including Lord Diane August, should have been completely wiped out here. From that, Ivan could easily deduce the original progression for Isabel, where she would have awakened in despair and wiped out every single enemy in this forest. But now, looking at the cheerful, smiling faces of the people gathered around the campfire, he knew they survived solely because he had interfered, something entirely impossible for a normal NPC. A sense of relief washed over Ivan's heart as he looked straight up at the sky and thought how glad he was that he wasn't an NPC. Memories flashed through his mind in a brilliant, sparkling sequence as he suddenly recalled that day, the day when the first hero cleaved the sky in two. Later on, they used to lie together on the ground gazing at the sparkling night sky, knowing that what the hero wanted to see on that day wasn't just the stars. Ivan's eyes never left the largest, brightest star twinkling in the night sky, hidden behind the thick clouds blanketing the Demon King's territory, wanting to make sure the morning star was still shining in its rightful place. Yet a moment later, he let out a sigh and glanced back briefly, admitting to himself that he had never really liked that hero. But then Ivan remembered Maximilian's smiling face from that very night, even now. Looking back at Isabel resting tiredly yet contentedly on the ground, he realized the morning star was still shining right there where it belonged, and all he could do was admire it. Seeing Ivan looking like he intended to leave, she sat up and declared that now that her mind was made up, she would remind herself of her original goal, ensuring that all the daughters of the hero's party graduated safely. Ivan slowly rummaged inside his coat without a word of explanation, knowing that to achieve that goal, there was still so much he needed to figure out, such as how demons were able to roam so freely near the capital like this. He calmly pulled a green potion from his coat, wondering just who was leading them and how many had already infiltrated the academy. That sight horrified Isabel, who stared in shock and asked him what on earth he was doing. The eerie green glow from the glass vial made Ivan look even more dangerous and mystical, as he remarked that the eradication squad had plenty of ways to treat injuries, mostly to satisfy that kind of curiosity. As the greenish liquid poured continuously over Ifelos's body, the demon thrashed in agony, screaming curses about how sparing his life wouldn't make him betray his kind, calling them damned, filthy humans. He writhed and screamed through his pain, defying them to try and torture him, proudly declaring himself Centurion Ifelos of the 6th Iron Dragon General's Vanguard Infantry Division. Shooting Ivan a vicious, hate-filled glare, he told him to remember his face because he would never forget it, not even in hell. His long, pointed tongue lolled out past his teeth. Keeping his composure entirely, Ivan calmly replied that the guy really was just a disposable frontline pawn, finding it unbelievable that anyone still believed in those ancient legends. Touching Ifelos's dust-covered face with his grime-stained hand, he noted that biting his tongue wouldn't kill him since the human body wasn't that fragile. Otherwise, people would just drop dead from choking on dinner every single night. Without hesitation, Ivan forced the demon's mouth open and poured the liquid in, explaining that since he couldn't move from the start, the only way he'd die of shock was a heart attack. So doing that would only drag out his suffering, adding that he wasn't here to torture him. Staring down with cold, emotionless eyes, He told the centurion that this was just first aid and that was a recovery potion. Suddenly, a strange voice interrupted, catching Ivan off guard as the poisoned Spider Petrovich spoke up. Though hanging on by a thread in a state of suspended animation, he managed to gasp out that he heard the guy was dead, recognizing the eradication squad's methods and realizing what was happening, which startled Ivan internally as he wondered if this guy had served on the front line during the war. Driven by curiosity, Ivan pressed him seriously, asking why someone of his caliber was personally interfering here, nodding that someone with his abilities shouldn't be treated as a disposable tool easily thrown away. While fellows could only struggle to answer through his rigid jaw that it was because they couldn't afford another failure, causing Ivan's pupils to constrict in shock at the mention of another failure, suddenly understanding why someone this strong had been assigned as Isabel's tutorial boss. Vague, amber-tinted memories resurfaced in his mind as he deduced that because he had derailed their previous operation, the demons had dispatched an officer-tier powerhouse to ensure failure wouldn't happen again. His own agility and weapons had wiped out the rest, but it raised the question of why they would send a centurion, the lowest rank among officers. A bitter realization made Ivan lower his head, figuring out that there wouldn't likely be any other major terrorist attacks after this since the mission had failed, making him face the harsh truth that this whole incident was just carried out by a small rogue faction of extremists. Sitting down beside Ifelos' battered body, he gave a blunt assessment that the masterminds would feed their allies a scripted story and throw him away, to which Ifelos surprisingly reacted with indifferent resignation, saying he knew as much. Clenching the weapon in his palm tightly, Ivan reasoned that it made sense. Whether he succeeded or failed from the start, he was just a disposable weapon meant to be thrown away and never reclaimed, much like Ivan's tall silhouette towering over him with a blade placed even greater pressure on Ifelos, as he muttered the words, "The eradication squad." Grabbing the demon by the horns and hoisting him up with a hint of leniency, Ivan laid out his three choices. The first was to remain captive, be dragged back to Prizhenkaya under heavy armed guard, and die a slow death under brutal torture and magical seals by the counterintelligence forces. In his steady, even tone, Ivan explained the second choice, being released right here to return home, though counterintelligence would tail him wherever he went, and his own kind would brand him a traitor who sold them out to save his own skin. Pausing mid-sentence, he brought the blade closer to Ifelos' neck as he prepared to deliver the third option. Flinching slightly at the razor-sharp edge pressed against his throat, Ifelos finally forced himself to speak. Clenching his teeth, he recited a bitter command through gritted teeth, quoting the dark prayer about walking through the valley of the shadow of death and fearing no evil because he is with them. He proclaimed himself the polar star in the darkest night and the beacon in the stormy sea, telling Ivan to stop wasting time and just kill him. Recognizing the chant in an even voice, Ivan realized it was a prayer dedicated to the Demon King. The next second, Ivan casually shifted topics and asked if his parents were still alive, leaving the demon blinking in utter bewilderment as he stammered out a confused "what?" Staring at him in disbelief, the demon demanded to know what the hell he was talking about, to which Ivan simply replied with total composure that he ran an orphanage. To go and eliminate the 7 dragon generals. Ivan solemnly recalled that directive like a mission as he walked alone toward the sun, leaving behind the scattered corpses of the battlefield, remembering how 4 years ago, when the eradication squad received that order, all 8 assault teams were completely wiped out except for a single one. Elizaveta's tears fell onto the paperwork on her desk as she recalled what she told him when he returned safely. With a heartbroken expression, she bowed her head to sign the papers, urging him to live out the rest of his quiet life far away from everyone's eyes and to act as if she were dead, apologizing for failing to stop that order and expressing her sheer gratitude that he survived. Looking down at Ifelos with the blade still at his throat, Ivan explained that if he had even the slightest desire to live, he could shed his past identity and live a forgotten life like a dead man. Stubbornly refusing, Ifelos muttered that he wasn't worthy, but Ivan quickly countered that everyone deserved a second chance, adding that loyalty and faith didn't have to define a person's entire existence. Grabbing the demon's horns while advising him in a deep voice, Ivan offered to snap his horns off if he wished, since those were the final chains binding his body. That threat terrified Ifelos, before Ivan added that if he preferred, he could lower the edge of the axe just a little bit further. Softening his gaze slightly, Ivan delivered his final ultimatum, giving him one last chance to choose whether to live like a human or perish like one. Looking up at Ivan, Ifelos hesitated out of sheer terror. He squeezed his eyes shut, struggling deeply with his thoughts. Finally trapped between those grim fates, he admitted that he wanted to live. A pleased, quiet note of praise escaped Ivan as he told him it was a wise choice. Followed by the sound of Ifelos' horns being snapped by Ivan, the very next day his registration photo for the orphanage was finalized under the name Ifelos status. Orphan age, 505 race, demon. Thoughts of a moving train drifting forward once more crossed his mind, as he concluded that the most plausible hypothesis was that this world operated like an academy story. Shattered ruins and chaos surrounded them, confirming his theory that Isabel, the hero's daughter, had been ambushed. But because of his interference, the tutorial difficulty had skyrocketed through the roof. Medical teams were treating the wounded and handling bodies at the base of the mountain, meaning the demons weren't just pre-programmed entities following a fixed route. They, and everyone else in this world, were far more than mere NPCs. As the evening sky shifted into a brilliant twilight display, he realized that predicting every single event was impossible and obsessing over the exact plot was ultimately meaningless, leaving only one thing he truly needed to focus on. Standing before Ivan and Isabel were two crying children hugging each other tightly, reminding him that his core objective was keeping these kids alive until graduation, even if players, NPCs, and events all veered wildly off course in unexpected directions. As Ivan looked down at her while deep in thought, knowing that singular goal would never change, Isabel softly called out to him, "Uncle." Her voice trembled as she watched a grieving family crying agonizingly over the body of their child, wondering aloud if they and everyone else on that train could have made it back safely if she hadn't boarded it today. Ivan calmly replied that they probably would have, though he left unsaid the fact that they weren't just simple NPCs either. Suddenly continuing his thought, Ivan blurted out, 30,000 people a year, leaving Isabel blinking in confusion as she let out a bewildered huh. The path the hero's party walked was completely deserted and deceptively easy, serving merely to clear the way for their infiltration. Those were the casualty numbers from luring the Demon King's forces into an unwinnable war. An image of Maximilian flashing past the fallen corpses of the dead crossed his mind as a desperate measure to annihilate the 7 dragon generals and the Demon King, meaning 30,000 lives fell beneath the hero's hands every year. A horrific reality known to himself, the soldiers, and everyone else. Despite that heavy burden, a deeply anxious yet warm smile crept onto his face, knowing that the hero always smiled through everything. Reaching out his dried, blood-stained hands while telling her the story, he noted that even when hope was so scarce you had to carve a path through the heavens just to find a single morning star, the hero had to remain the light of hope for everyone, because the moment he fell would spell the absolute end for the allied kingdoms. Pointing straight ahead, Ivan told her to look, causing Isabel to follow his gesture as her eyes sparkled in wonder. He solemnly entrusted her with the responsibility, explaining that it was the star her father carried back then, and now it was the star she had to take over. Looking around in confusion, Isabel turned back to ask which star he meant since there were so many she could barely tell. But the next second, she let out a gasp of utter astonishment. The largest and brightest star in the night sky shifted its position slightly, reminding her that being a hero meant far more than simply being the strongest. Standing beneath the giant tree gazing up at the starlit sky together, Ivan reminded her that someone who never kneels under any weight and never loses their smile no matter the circumstances is what they truly call a hero. Gently resting his hand on her head as he spoke, he told her that as Maximilian's daughter Isabel, she must hold her head high, stand firm, and rise alongside hope. Looking directly into her green eyes, Ivan gently advised her to live her own life, remembering and cherishing the sacrifices of others instead of being consumed by guilt, proving that their sacrifices weren't in vain, because people pity the gloomy yet admire those who keep a smile on their face. Beaming with pride as he looked down at Isabel under the shining starlight, he likened her to the morning star. Staring up at him, Isabel's cheeks flushed a soft pink. The next moment, she jokingly suggested whether he was thinking of shaving off his beard, only for him to flatly and instantly refuse. Early morning in late February at the grand campus of St. Jansk University, the cheerful chatter of young men and women echoed through the air even in the chilly early spring morning, as freshmen unable to hide their excitement asked each other if they had passed. Standing in stark contrast to the bright newcomers were 2 dazed students weighed down by piles of books, looking like long lines of victims eyed with pity by upperclassmen everywhere you look. Out in the outer courtyard, students of all different races waited solemnly for what seemed like a normal entrance ceremony. Suddenly, the sky above them darkened as they looked up, watching a colossal shadow cast itself over the entire St. Jansk University campus. The sudden appearance caused onlookers to point and murmur in shock, marveling at the flying battleship bearing the unmistakable national crest of Krasila. Dmitri ran at full speed through the frantic panic, shouting that they were doomed. Bursting frantically through the doors into her office, he yelled that they were truly finished because a Krasilov battleship was hovering right over Przyankaya. Annoyed by the intrusion, she retorted that she had eyes. Elizavetta's growing madness showed clearly in her deeply displeased expression. While everyone else craned their necks to stare at the sky, Ivan alone felt deeply exasperated, hopping against hope that those people wouldn't just finish off the rest. Reasoning that since Isabel had already been caught up in a derailed train, everyone getting out alive was basically a miracle. Two flying battleships soared across the clear blue sky, prompting the thought that what the elves were doing up there could be summed up in two lines. Your border control is an absolute joke. We protect our own children. And while you'd think nobody would dare pull such a reckless stunt, it was entirely within the realm of possibility. Walking inward alone, wrapped in his own thoughts, he figured Esidice, the daughter of Einar from the hero's party, was probably aboard that airship, before suddenly whipping his head around at a voice calling out to ask if he hadn't said he was an instructor. Dragging her suitcase behind her, Isabel hurried over to Ivan, demanding to know what kind of professor someone with his skills must be, guessing he taught physical education or maybe night studies, though she wondered if St. Jansk University even had an assassination department, ultimately asking if he really was a gym teacher, to which Ivan gave a single glance and recognized that Isabel, the hero's daughter, had arrived. Replying with a terrifyingly serious expression that he was a gardener, Isabel shrieked in absolute disbelief. Amidst the crowd, Esidice stood on guard, observing the scene quietly from a distance. He spotted Lucia standing alone whistling a tune, the disciple of Enrique, who had apparently been in the capital all along. Nearby, a handsome student was drawing the attention of numerous girls as they headed inside, with Ivan keeping up appearances while secretly keeping a close eye on the other key characters. Striding boldly into the campus grounds with Isabel hauling luggage behind him, he noted that all the children of the hero's party had safely arrived at the academy. Observing the situation with sharp, serious eyes, Ivan figured that since the opening ceremony was happening in the main hall, it was about time he prepared for his next steps. A buzzing commotion continued to ripple through the auditorium. In a story about an academy featuring a whole cast of characters from various backgrounds gathered together, unexpected trouble always breaks out during the entrance ceremony as a matter of course. Meanwhile, a lone young man standing by himself amidst the gathering felt a wave of dizzying confusion, wondering what on earth was happening. His eyes widened continuously as he watched events unfold. Suddenly, a system window popped up congratulating him, sending his mind into a whirl as a status screen appeared. Afterwards, they learned that the infamous trash sword genius of the Northern Grand Duchy had completely transformed the moment he was possessed and received affection. He then stylishly thwarted a terrorist attack at his academy and became famous overnight. His real name was Eugene, but in this story, he was Evgeny Novikov Karamzin. Out of nowhere, another system window flashed in front of Evgeny displaying a new mission and congratulating him on its start. Rank D, prevent the academy raid. The academy is under attack by an unknown faction. Prevent the assault in the grand auditorium and department facilities during the entrance ceremony. Objectives: disarm explosives 03. Optional objectives: eliminate intruders, protect freshmen 0322. Staring hard at the system window, Evgeny muttered to himself that as they could see, he was a transmigrator. While he was still staring at it, the system window suddenly turned bright red. Another notification popped up right in front of him stating that the reward had been cancelled, leaving Evgeny completely baffled as to why the quest was suddenly cancelled. Wondering if choosing the Department of Theology had been a mistake, he thought his plan had been completely foolproof. He had steered a sword genius self like him into theology, because the sharpest blade he had ever held in his life was just a kitchen knife. So how on earth was he supposed to start fighting monsters with a sword? Learning swordsmanship and actually using a sword to kill something were two completely different things. And as someone who had never even cut up a chicken in modern Korea, this was entirely too much for him to handle. That was why he chose theology, since according to the setting his character supposedly had an aptitude for swordsmanship, meaning if things went according to plan he would acquire swordsmanship, enhancement skills, and healing magic. After that, all he needed to do was safely become ridiculously overpowered. But seeing the status window suddenly issue a quest and instantly cancel it made him curse in frustration over why this was happening. Elsewhere, Ivan was busy dealing with the bombs. At the same time, the first mandatory objective on the mission board was completed. After successfully disarming the explosives, Ivan simply stated, "Disarm." He then continued to ponder, noting that an attack during the Academy's opening ceremony was practically a given. However, considering the bombers in the sky and the counterintelligence command on high alert, attacking the Academy right now was tantamount to suicide, yet they were still pushing forward. Ivan carefully reviewed the situation and continued his deduction. They had chosen locations that wouldn't attract the guards' attention, blind spots where they wouldn't be spotted by civilians, and where the explosives couldn't be seen from the windows of surrounding buildings. Having searched for positions meeting all those conditions, he paused for a moment, realizing this was the work of professionals. And tracing their logic in reverse, he figured out that by working backward from their reasoning, he could narrow down the spots where they had planted the bombs. Once he roughly determined their locations, he just needed to walk over and collect them. After which Ivan was seen carrying the bomb containers outside, placing them on the ground, and beginning to bury them underground. While working, he muttered to himself that at this point, it was no different from harvesting young potatoes. And once the explosives were dealt with, Ivan started pondering the masterminds behind it all, realizing the only remaining question was who did it, with the problem being that far too many suspects came to mind. The ones with the strongest motive to terrorize St. Jansk University were the demons, but unless they were completely out of their minds, they wouldn't act like this right after their recent defeat. He continued weighing the possibilities, noting that the elves had a floating warship hovering above St. Jansk University, making them prime candidates to take the blame for a terrorist attack, yet they stood to gain very little from bombing the academy, possessing the means but lacking the motive. Ivan then thought of the most probable culprit, concluding that the Crown Prince's faction was the most likely candidate, possessing both the means and the motive to attack St. Jansk University. But even for them, today remained an exceptionally difficult day to make a move, because Elizaveta's enraged counterintelligence forces were guarding the entire area. With that thought, Ivan took a deep breath and kept thinking, noting that in a typical Academy genre story, an attack during the opening ceremony was practically mandatory, and for it to truly feel like an Academy genre story, there also had to be secret operatives planted inside the Academy. And while Ivan remained deep in thought, someone suddenly spoke up from behind him. "What is this, a black Santa Claus?" The moment Ivan heard the voice, his astonishing reaction speed instantly kicked in. Without a second of hesitation, he picked up a rock and hurled it directly at the person behind him. However, the mysterious man effortlessly sliced the rock in half with his sword. Then an unexpected situation unfolded, as the impact kicked up dust that filled the air, completely obscuring the mysterious man's figure. And by the time Ivan looked back, the man had vanished from sight. Ivan muttered under his breath about the Santa Claus thing, looking extremely annoyed. There was no Christmas in this world, nor any old man leaving candy, toys, and stockings outside. With that thought, Ivan immediately began searching for the mysterious man, scanning every direction. Meanwhile, the man rapidly cleared the area at a terrifying speed, muttering to himself that it was definitely another reincarnator. Afterwards, a large building appeared, with the narration identifying it as the counterintelligence headquarters. Ivan slowly walked toward the building with a clearly visible expression of annoyance. The guard stationed outside instantly raised his gun and pointed it at him, yelling for him to halt, warning that it was a restricted area and ignoring his warning would lead to consequences. But Ivan was expertly trained with reaction speeds far exceeding an ordinary person, and in the blink of an eye, he grabbed the soldier's gun and effortlessly disassembled it. He then twisted the man's arm and calmly stated, "Well trained." At that moment, several other guards rushed over and immediately aimed their guns at Ivan, prompting him to look around and remark, "Nice disguise." He then calmly told them to call Dmitri, leading a stammering officer to ask in absolute shock if he knew Lieutenant Colonel Dmitri, telling them not to make a fuss and to find a quiet place to talk. And increasingly irritated, Ivan glared at them all and stated, "My name is Ivan Petrovich. Is anyone here formerly from the extermination squad?" An officer immediately replied that he was from the final batch, apologizing and asking if he could see his face. A moment later, Ivan released the man he was holding, though even then, all the surrounding soldiers kept their guns aimed straight at him, causing Ivan to look around and mutter, "Good grief, this is really happening." The officer stared intently at Ivan's face. Recalling his appearance from the past, little Ivan, he instantly showed utmost respect to his superior, stating it was an honor to meet Lieutenant Colonel Petrovich, introducing himself as Opsora formerly from the 3rd Assault Squad, and mentioning that he had only ever seen him once before from afar. Hearing that, Ivan simply repeated, "Do not mourn those who departed before us," stepping forward to add, "because I stand in the exact same ranks as them." The soldier looked at him with skepticism. "I heard you died in combat, Lieutenant Colonel. I'm certain I saw your nameplate at the National Cemetery." To which Ivan calmly replied that he never expected any survivors from the 3rd Assault Squad, instead of the era's elites. Hearing those words, the soldier answered, "I survived, all of us survived." Following that exchange, Ivan resumed walking and gave his orders, telling them to bring Dmitri to him and simultaneously issue a notification to all new students. Looking thoroughly infuriated, Ivan continued, "I want the complete roster of every university student, faculty member, and guest attending the opening ceremony, important figures, Their families, acquaintances, relatives, everyone currently able to access St. Jansk University. Tell them I need a list of everybody. Hearing the demand, the soldier immediately responded, "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel." He then turned to his men and barked orders to notify Lieutenant Colonel Cherkov and inform them that an emergency situation had occurred. Ivan watched his men spring into action, while muttering to himself that the target was a reincarnator whose specialty was swordsmanship. Recalling their recent encounter, he deduced that the person was young, male or female, and if male at least before his voice broke, though the voice was too vague to pinpoint. Concluding that he needed to hear it a few more times to make a judgment, he carefully analyzed the mysterious person's movements, noting that given the agile motions and quick reflexes, the individual possessed bullet trajectory perception. Ivan continued thinking carefully, trying to figure out the reincarnator's identity by wondering if they were Korean, though brushing it off as unimportant compared to the fact that they were an Earthling, questioning why they came here and how they arrived in this world, wondering if they were also the original author, or if this was just an accident, asking if they got hit by a truck. Pausing for a moment, he acknowledged that they could very well be the original author, as such things happened often, leading him to a deeply serious conclusion. There is one thing I can be certain of, he knew the original work was an Academy genre story, which is the only reason a reincarnator would deliberately step into a university, because he knows the original plot. With that thought, Ivan began scanning the entire surrounding area. Growing so furious that the object in his hand began to crack and splinter under his grip, he muttered, "So he knows the ending too." His expression turned grim as he muttered that he was getting curious now. "First, I'll find the reincarnator and figure out if that damn original work wrote down my ending too. And after that, I'll only have one thing left to do." Meanwhile, elsewhere, someone suddenly called out, "Novikov Karamjan, you useless piece of trash." Evgeny turned toward the voice and muttered, "Father," as the man immediately scolded him, demanding how he could cause so much trouble just by going to the bathroom, calling him as useless as ever. Evgeny felt utterly miserable, thinking to himself that being thrown into an unfamiliar family as a useless youngest son and treated this way was already bad enough. But what on earth was up with that crazy guy from earlier? Was he a monster, or no, he had never heard of anything like that? Suddenly, several new system windows popped up directly in front of Evgeny. One of them announced that a new quest had begun. Additional panels appeared one after another, revealing the quest details. Unranked quest, the Gardener of St. Jansk University. You have caught his attention. May luck be with you, Arid. Defeat the Gardener. Optional objective, survive. Penalty for failure, death. Evgeny's face turned pale, looking on the verge of tears and feeling completely terrified by what he just read, stammering, "I'm going to die." The scene then shifted to a cafe in downtown Przyankaya, where a soldier was speaking to his superior. "Superior, I told you meeting in a place like this is a bit inconvenient for us. The orphanage is better. We should have met at a place like that. You think I became a regular sponsor of your orphanage for no reason? Knowing your personality, you definitely came here because of an emergency." Right at that moment, Ivan walked into the room accompanied by a captain. As soon as they entered, everyone present immediately shifted their attention toward them, staring at the two men for a few seconds with cold, intimidating gazes that radiated explicit hostility, looking ready to fight at any moment. However, the captain merely smiled and calmly said, "All right, everyone back to your business. Act natural." The moment he gave the order, everyone immediately returned to what they were doing, acting as if nothing unusual had happened, making it hard to believe these exact people were exuding such intense murderous intent just seconds prior. Ivan and the captain then walked over to a table far away from the others and sat down, with the captain looking at Ivan to ask, "So, what did you bring me?" To which Ivan calmly replied, "It's better if the superior sees it for himself." Without wasting any time, Ivan placed all the bombs right in front of him, the very explosives he had managed to disarm before they could detonate. The moment the captain saw them, his expression changed completely, turning furious and instantly releasing a powerful aura. Ivan quickly explained, "I already removed the detonators from the bombs," prompting the captain to reply, "You should have said that from the beginning, you almost scared me to death." Carefully inspecting the explosives, the captain began his analysis. "Mana capacity is quite weak. These aren't designed to blow up a building or assassinate a VIP, they're probably just meant to create a distraction, right?" Prompting a nearby person to instantly agree, "That's right, there's definitely a separate infiltration team." Right then, a woman approached the table, and the captain handed all the bombs over to her with an important order. "This definitely isn't the Crown Prince's faction, we haven't lost track of anyone on our end. Take these to the magic department at headquarters." The woman accepted the explosives and respectfully answered, "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel." Afterwards, the captain handed something to Ivan saying, "Here is what you asked for. I had to sweat quite a bit to get it ready on such short notice." and Ivan took it with a simple thanks. The captain added, "One more thing, the lady wants to meet you once. Do you have free time?" To which Ivan instantly replied, "That's going to be difficult for me for a while." Without saying another word, Ivan stood up and walked out of the cafe. Not long after Ivan left, the woman returned to Lieutenant Colonel Petrovich, remarking, "Lieutenant Colonel Petrovich, little Ivan is truly something else. His reputation is completely unexaggerated, he's genuinely amazing," prompting the captain to smile and reply, "That's precisely why someone needs to date him, just look at how gloomy he's become. Coiling up in a house without sunlight and living all alone." He then issued another order. "All right, keep tabs on him. Don't let my superior wander around by himself." Returning to his room, Ivan immediately began reviewing all the documents he received, carefully examining the information while calculating the number of potential suspects. Noting there were about 3,000 new students enrolled this year. And since St. Jansk University had a 3-year program, it meant around 1,000 students per year. Adding graduate students and those on leave, including faculty, professors, teaching assistants, security, administrative staff, and admissions officers, brought the total to 1,733 people. Factoring in the families of new students attending the opening ceremony and foreign VIPs, pushed the total up to 2,429. Ivan's expression suddenly turned dead serious as he studied the data, muttering aloud, "I know you're here. I know because I'm a reincarnator myself." He continued thinking about the person he was hunting. "You must be using knowledge from your past life to build a powerful network and introduce modern culture, copying the actions of the protagonist from the original story." Ivan's gaze grew colder. "You're probably enjoying being reincarnated into this world, treating everyone around you like mere objects. You probably feel like you're strolling through a perfectly designed amusement park, especially after the war that all those NPCs fought desperately through has finally ended. You probably wanted to enroll in the academy and experience the whole fantasy reincarnation game for yourself." The lives of countless people treated as mere background characters in the story were probably things he couldn't care less about and would never understand. "I didn't expect finding you to be easy, but it won't take too long either." The investigation dragged on all night, and by morning, Ivan had narrowed the suspects down to 3 individuals. The scene then shifted to 2 female students sitting together. Suddenly, Isabel recognized a familiar face and realized it was her friend Nazareth, whose face lit up with happiness upon spotting Isabel, hurrying over as Isabel warmly greeted her. "It's been way too long." At the same time, the girl sitting next to Isabel introduced herself to Nazareth. "Nice to meet you, I'm Yuri Frank, just call me Yuri." She then looked at Nazareth and politely asked, "Einar's daughter, should I call you that?" Prompting Nazareth to quickly clarify, That just means my dad's daughter, among friends just call me Nazareth." Yuri looked surprised. "Just Nazareth, but you're a princess," causing tears to well up in Nazareth's eyes as she wiped them away and continued, "I'm genuinely moved because I've never been treated like this before," explaining that no one had ever been willing to sit down and share a meal with her until now, making this simple gesture of friendship mean more to her than anyone could imagine, which left a confused Yuri to ask, "Why didn't anybody want to approach you?" Isabel answered, "Because Nazareth's uncle is always escorting her everywhere." Nazareth suddenly began laughing almost hysterically as she complained about her situation. "My uncle ruined everything for me, especially my college life, thanks Sybil. If it weren't for you I probably wouldn't even have a single friend." Isabel immediately corrected her. "You should thank Yuri, not me, she might not look it, but she's actually an exceptionally talented person. Yuri is our department's full scholarship student. She's great at swordsmanship, even better than me and even better than Oscar. Seriously, where on earth did someone like her come from?" Leaving Nazareth to look at Yuri in surprise and say, "Wow, she's even better than you, Isabel." Embarrassed by all the praise, Yuri modestly replied, "You're flattering me too much, I just got lucky." While the 3 girls kept chatting, Ivan quietly observed them from afar, connecting the clues in his mind. Isabel, Nazareth, and a freshman named Yuri Frank, one of the new students everyone was talking about who enrolled on a full scholarship despite being an orphan. Much like most war orphans around here, she likely chose the name Yuri Frank herself, though something about her identity immediately caught Ivan's attention, because Yuri Frank was a fairly common first and last name in Krasilov. But within Krasilov's cultural sphere, Yuri was traditionally a male name, with the only countries where Yuri was commonly used as a female name being Korea and Japan. In other words, Yuri Frank could be a reincarnator, prompting him to eliminate all unnecessary possibilities from his investigation and prepare for the next phase. Elsewhere, a nearby girl called out to someone, "Let's walk together. What classes do you have this afternoon?" Yevgeny replied, "I'm heading to the biblical exegetical orientation," prompting the girl to ask about his other class, to which he answered, "I have the original gospel reading class." Realizing he had said something weird, Yevgeny quickly corrected himself. "Oh, sorry, as the girl just smiled and said, "It's fine, see you later, enjoy your classes." After she left, Yevgeny kept walking while thinking to himself, "If I knew I had to study this much, I never would have chosen the theology department." However, as he walked, he suddenly got a distinct feeling that someone was following him. The scene cut upward to reveal Ivan sitting high up in a tree, while Yevgeny looked around suspiciously, thinking, "I'm being stalked by a crazy Santa Claus throwing catapult rocks or something." Right at that moment, a tree branch right above Yevgeny was suddenly severed. He looked up and finally spotted Ivan, who simultaneously realized Yevgeny had noticed him, thinking, "That brat just locked eyes with me. I was stalking him from quite far away near the main theology building, yet he still managed to spot me." Ivan began inspecting Yevgeny more closely. This kid also has a completely normal name, Yevgeny, nothing particularly weird about it. But if I trace Yevgeny from its etymology, aside from the pronunciation, it's also a name commonly used in Korea. Ivan seriously considered his next step. Should I catch him and interrogate him? After careful thought, he ultimately decided against it. No, if I want to handle this without causing trouble for myself, I need to prepare properly first. I can kill or catch him anytime, so I'll wait until I identify the final target. Right then, someone else appeared nearby carrying a large sniper rifle. The counterintelligence command begged me to come, so I thought I'd drop by for a bit. But what on earth is that idiot doing? Without warning, she fired a shot straight at Ivan. Ivan narrowly dodged the bullets, and instantly glared at the direction the attack came from. The woman looked back at him and asked, "What are you doing here? Come back to my place with me, disciple, and while we're at it, I want to check out your orphanage too." The scene then cut to St. Vasilicia Orphanage as night fell. Inside the director's office, Enrique was surrounded by piles of documents. As she reviewed Ivan's investigation, her annoyance grew steadily. Is this target speech analysis? You even deduced intonation by studying subtext and hyoid bone shifts, and here's a list of regions they could hail from based on their voice. Seriously, what kind of life have you lived? Clearly overwhelmed by the massive workload Ivan had compiled, Enrique angrily grabbed a paper and demanded an explanation. What is all of this? She then hurled the paper at Ivan. You wouldn't put this much effort into hunting down an international criminal with a red notice from the counterintelligence command. Yet you do all of this for a student, and you did it all by yourself, staying awake for days without sleep. Enrique then picked up a bottle of medicine and thought to herself that sometimes there were men like this. Men who once ruled the battlefield and ultimately became ticking time bombs ready to go off at any moment. Staring straight at Ivan, she said, "Ivan Petrovich, you're human, which means there are basic things you need to survive. Sleep, food, and rest. Exactly who are you trying to catch? The terrorist at St. Jansk University?" To which Ivan simply replied, "No, you wouldn't understand." Enrique grew even more frustrated. She grabbed Ivan by the collar and gave a firm demand. Talk. Left with no choice, Ivan began explaining the situation indirectly. Hypothetically, let's say there's someone like this. Someone who suddenly left behind the place they used to live and everyone they knew, only to materialize out of thin air in a completely unfamiliar world. No matter how hard they try, they can't wake up from the dream, and the surrounding world keeps feeling like something straight out of a novel. Maybe they're terrified of dying, maybe they want to go home, but either way, they did everything they could to survive. And fortunately, they had a bit of talent, so they adapted quickly and eventually built a life here. So why doesn't the story end? Then right in the middle of it all, someone else suddenly appears. A stranger, presumably from the exact same homeland. And then you start asking yourself, could that person be the actual protagonist? If that person reaches the ending, will I simply be discarded afterward? Perhaps my arrival in this world was nothing more than a tiny mistake made by a godlike entity controlling this entire universe. After listening to Ivan's explanation, Enrique grew profoundly confused. Studying him carefully while slowly connecting all the pieces, she asked, "So in short, you really are a reincarnator?" And Ivan answered honestly, "Hard to believe, but yes." Enrique continued, "And recently you confirmed there's another reincarnator, so now you've decided you have to kill him," with Ivan confirming it despite knowing how hard it sounded to believe. "That's right, I know you won't believe me." But then Enrique said something that completely caught Ivan off guard. "Ivan, listen to me carefully, you aren't the first. I've met another reincarnator besides you." Ivan was utterly stunned by her words. Up until that moment, he had firmly believed he was the only one who had experienced reincarnation, never imagining anyone had arrived before him. Enrique then revealed the name that changed everything. The name of that person was the hero Maximilian.